Chapter 145. Brother Li. Brother Li. As soon as Ling Xian pushed Ling Li out of the study, she saw Tang Lei, who was aggrieved like a little wife, rushed to the wheelchair. From a distance, it was like a meatball in clothes was rolling to the wheelchair and was going to crush it. Ling Li didn't panic at all. He picked his nose with disgust. Then he saw Tang Lei kneeling down in front of him skillfully. Two fat and greasy hands slapped on Ling Li's legs. Tang Lei cried with tears and snot, "Brother Li, you have to seek justice for me." Ling Li raised his eyebrows and lazily asked, "What? What did the bastard of the Ma family do to you again?" He sighed in his heart that Tang Lei was too weak. He watched him being bullied since childhood. Tang Lei, the eldest son of the Grand Commandant's mansion, didn't say anything and didn't dare to tell the elders of the family. However, he could understand it. After all, the old guy in the Tang's mansion always favored a smarter little bastard. Fatty Tang was the eldest son, but his status in the family was very low. The old Grand Commandant was afraid that people would gossip about him because he was the eldest son. So, he sent Fatty Tang to the affiliated school to save face. If Fatty Tang said it, he would be beaten again. No one would vent his anger for him. Sometimes when Ling Li was bored, he would help Tang Lei to teach Ma Ling and others a lesson. Fatty Tang admired Ling Li very much and regarded him as the boss. If Ling Li mentioned Ma Ling in normal times, Tang Lei would show an angry expression, but he didn't this time. Tang Lei stood up with a sad face and patted his belly. "Brother Li, can't you see anything?" Ling Li rolled his eyes and scolded, "I'm not a rabbit, and I'm not blind. I don't want to see your lard." As he spoke, he waved his hand. Whether it was his expression or his tone, he was the living embodiment of a spoiled hedonistic son of a rich family. Tang Lei was more aggrieved when he heard that. He shook his belly and said, "Brother Li, look. I've really lost a lot of weight. In the past, I could still feel it when I shook my stomach, but now the meat has become solid. The meat that I ate with my own ability is gone just like that." Hearing the fat man's repeated emphasis, Ling Li finally glanced at Tang Lei impatiently. But this glance made him slightly serious, and a chill rose in his heart. Tang Lei was indeed thin, and abnormally thin. He had just seen Tang Lei yesterday, but he had lost at least 15 kilograms of meat today, which was too abnormal. Seeing that Ling Li was a little more serious, Tang Lei finally felt that he found an outlet to vent. He knelt down and hugged Ling Li's legs, crying loudly, "It's all because of Su Li, the lecturer of the affiliated school. She gave me poison when we met. It's so cruel. Brother Li, you have to help me." Tang Lei cried so hard that his tears and snot were all wiped on Ling Li's clothes. The scene was so beautiful that Ling Xian couldn't help but turn her back quietly to let her eyes suffer less. Ling Li was shocked when he heard it. "Su Li. Su Li." She did it so quickly, and it was even to the fat man. He had already understood Su Li's poison. Of course, he admired Su Li's medical skills more. There were few people in the world who could make his mood fluctuate, but Su Li was the one who made him worried and couldn't sleep for several days. "Fat man, tell me, how did Su Li torture you?" Ling Li couldn't help but ask. Even he didn't realize that when he asked this question, he couldn't help but raise the corner of his mouth. It seemed that it was a pleasant thing to be in the same city with Su Li. Tang Lei only thought that Ling Li was laughing at him. But facing Ling Li, who only regarded him as a friend, he was not angry. Instead, he talked about the details of his encounter with Su Li first. She asked about the lecturer of the affiliated school, and then she gave you a green poison pill? Ling Li touched his chin and was lost in thought. He didn't get along with Su Li for a long time, but he also knew that the woman would not poison people for no reason. Instead, she was extremely principled. Since Tang Lei helped her solve her doubts, she should give him the corresponding reward. Why did she give him a laxative? Seeing that Ling Li worried about him, Tang Lei was moved. He couldn't help but interrupt, "Brother Li, I feel much better after telling you. It's better to forget it. Although I lost weight after taking the laxative, I also feel much lighter. I'm not as heavy as before. If things get serious, you can't control Su Li. At that time, even old lady can't protect you," Tang Lei said. He was more and more worried that Ling Li would do something absurd again. Ling Li was the first playboy in Yunjing for a reason. One of the most famous things was that he almost tarnished Wu Xiuxiu, the daughter of the Wu family. That thing was so serious that the Ling family and the Wu family almost used troops because of it. Finally, it was settled by the emperor. It was a big crime to tarnish a person's innocence, but the Ling family fought for the Dahan country for generations. There were countless casualties. Now there were only two boys, Ling Ping and Ling Li. Ling Li was poisoned in his childhood and his legs were disabled. Then, he abandoned himself to despair and gradually became a playboy. The emperor was furious at that time. He ordered the supreme judiciary to find the murderer. But after so many years, the supreme judiciary still couldn't find the whereabouts of the murderer. In this regard, the emperor felt guilty for Ling Li. If he hadn't been poisoned, Ling Li should have become a good soldier in the army like his brother Ling Ping. Therefore, even if Ling Li made a terrible mistake, the emperor finally turned a blind eye and didn't punish him. Ling Li seemed to be scared and restrained a lot. He even went to his favorite brothel less often. At that time, Mrs. Jiyu felt gratified. But it didn't take long for Ling Li to return to his old ways. He ate, drank, gambled, and played with a group of playboys all day long. Mrs. Jiyu was so angry that she stayed in bed for half a month. Finally, she completely gave up on Ling Li and let him be. But for the face of the Ling family, she still sent him to the affiliated school. However, as the #1 playboy in Yunjing City, he couldn't be restricted by the affiliated school. He could go to the affiliated school if he wanted to, and he didn't have to go if he didn't want to. He was not restrained like other playboys. Tang Lei couldn't help admiring Ling Li when he thought of the glorious deeds of Ling Li in these years. Brother Li was really a role model of our generation. You said that your body was relaxed after you took the elixir? Ling Li ignored the latter half of Tang Lei's words and said with a smile on his face, "Fatty, I think that the elixir that Su Li gave you was not poison, but to help you recuperate. You are too fat and weak. Now it seems that you are in good health. I think it must be the elixir that Su Li gave you. You should blame her wrongly. You shouldn't." Tang Lei thought that Ling Li would say a few words of loyalty. Unexpectedly, he flattered Su Li in a twinkling of an eye. Tang Lei wanted to cry but had no tears. But to be honest, after listening to Ling Li's words, he really felt that Su Li was different from the previous cold-faced young lecturer. Thinking of this, he touched his round head and said with a silly smile, "It seems that I misunderstood her." But seriously. Tang Lei came over and his small eyes were shining. He said, "Su Li is really beautiful. She is even more beautiful than Wu Xiuxiu. Brother Li, don't you boast that you have seen all the beauties in the world. I didn't expect that I would surpass you one day." Tang Lei showed an expression of "you didn't expect it." Ling Li didn't know whether to laugh or cry. If he said that he not only knew Su Li but also slept in her bed for a month, would he go crazy? Thinking of this, Ling Li didn't find that he had a little complacency. But Ling Xian noticed that the master seemed to care about the girl named Su Li very much. After drinking tea in the yard, Tang Lei left with a happy face. His mood had become bright. Because of Ling Li, even if he was bullied by Ma Ling and others every day, he didn't feel desperate. After Tang Lei left, the happy atmosphere in the yard was swept away and replaced by seriousness. Ling Li's smile slowly disappeared. He got up from the wheelchair and went back to the room without saying a word. The whole Yunjing city seemed to be calm, but the undercurrent was turbulent. The emperor was old and had many princes. The position of the crown prince had not been determined yet. A bloody storm was inevitable. This was an internal trouble. The Nanjiang country quelled the internal strife, and the radical royal family gained the upper hand. After the reorganization, there would inevitably be a war, and the Dahan country would be the first to bear the brunt. This was an external trouble. In Yunjing City, there were many people in the martial arts circle. Because a treasure of the martial arts circle would be auctioned in Yunjing City. Many people would die before and after the auction. At this time, Su Li's family suddenly moved to Yunjing. Ling Li couldn't help but bow his head and frown. It was really a headache. After Su Li sorted out the things left by the senior fellow apprentice in the affiliated school, she closed the door and went to the National Book Tower. She was now in the dark and urgently needed to know the families in Yunjing City and the royal family of the Dahan country. When she went there, it was almost dark. Su Li didn't stay for a long time, and the National Book Tower was closed. She only read less than half of the information of Yunjing City, but she knew the general situation. There were so many first-grade officials. The families behind them were naturally the real rich and powerful families in Yunjing City. First, General Ling's mansion where Ms. Jiyu lived. Although Ms. Jiyu no longer served in the imperial court, she was a legendary figure in the Dahan country. Naturally, she couldn't be treated as an ordinary person. Second, the Ma family in the right prime minister's mansion. Third, the Tang family in the left prime minister's mansion. Fourth, the Wu family in the general's mansion. Both of them were first-grade officials and had great power in the imperial court. They were from the same rich and powerful families. Their status was no less than the royal family. Then there were the Ma family in the censorate and so on. The introduction was not detailed. Su Li roughly read it. In the night, she disguised herself and went to the Tianya house. Then she knew the overall situation. When she saw the description of Ling Li's file in the Tianya house, she couldn't help but feel strange. It turned out that he had been pretending to be disabled. Did he become disabled after he was seen through in the previous life? Seeing all kinds of absurd things that Ling Li had done over the years to deceive people, Su Li couldn't imagine what kind of mood such a gentleman had to ruin his reputation. After laughing, Su Li's eyes became clear again. She knew Ling Li's intention at a glance. He is really smart. Although the Ling family lost its halo, it was still in danger because of its great achievements. The men of the Ling family died in the battlefield one after another. It was quite strange. Ling Li deliberately showed weakness, but in fact, he wanted to protect himself. The emperor's family was the most ruthless. No one knew how the emperor remembered General Ling and how he was afraid of the Ling family. Thinking of this, Su Li put Ling Li's file aside and began to understand the complex situation in Yunjing carefully. At the same time, an unknown person bought a lot of intelligence of Yunjing City from the Tianya house, especially the intelligence of the Ling family. The news came to Ling Li's yard. "Master, there hasn't been anyone to investigate your file for a long time. Did someone find out your real identity?" Ling Xian read the note and couldn't help but ask with worry. Ling Li took the note with 2 fingers and put it on the candle to burn it into ashes. He didn't answer Ling Xian's question. Instead, he sat back in his seat and smiled deeply. He said that he would break the predestined relationship with Ling Li, but why did he show his scroll? Chapter 146. Su Qingtan followed Ling Qinglan to run around in the past 2 days. He was very busy. When he was free, he knew that Su Li became the legendary lecturer of the affiliated school. And Qi Xianqing used to be the royal preceptor. Even though Su Qingtan had tried his best to guess the identity of Qi Xianqing, he was still shocked by the word royal preceptor. At the same time, he was happy for Su Li. With the protection of the identity of the lecturer of the affiliated school, he didn't need to worry that his second sister would be bullied after he left Yunjing. "There is nothing to do today. You can go back and prepare." After changing his official uniform, Su Qingtan came to the Supreme Judiciary. He found that Ling Qinglan wore casual clothes and smiled lightly. "Prepare for what?" Su Qingtan was confused. "I forgot to tell you that today is the day that General Ling Ping returns to the imperial court. General Ling repelled the army of the Nanjiang country and made great achievements. The emperor is going to hold a banquet for him tonight. This is a good opportunity for you to get to know Lord Chen Gong. Don't miss it." Ling Qinglan reminded him carefully. He knew that the person Su Qingtan admired was the cruel official who was incorruptible all his life. So, he deliberately took it out and said, "Tonight, there will be a lot of daughters of noble families. You are old enough to get married. Why don't you go and have a look?" Su Qingtan rolled his eyes and thought, "You are 4 years older than me. Why don't I see you get married and have children?" However, when he heard that Lord Chen Gong would go, Su Qingtan also wanted to go and have a look. He also asked Su Li to go and see the world. If Su Li went to that occasion with her current identity, she would not be looked down upon. Seeing Ling Qinglan humming an unknown tune and leaving, Su Qingtan felt strange. It was obvious that young General Ling Ping won the war. Why was Ling Qinglan so happy as if he won the war? He really didn't understand. Near noon, the returning troops finally appeared at the gate of the city. Ling Ping, who was wearing armor, was on the horse in the front. He looked cold and solemn. As soon as he entered the city, people in Yunjing City cheered enthusiastically. General Ling, welcome back with victory. General Ling, General Ling. The enthusiastic people came to the ground one after another. Their cheers were like waves. The soldiers who entered the city were excited and their eyes were wet. It seemed that their sweat and blood on the battlefield were answered. Ling Ping was expressionless, and his heart was also as calm as water, even a little angry. Ever since he had taken command of the army, he had always been victorious and had never suffered a defeat. Some people even said that he was the reincarnation of his grandfather, a natural-born god of war, but only he himself knew that every time he won, he would win in an inexplicable manner. Sometimes, even though he had clearly lost, he would wake up the next day to find that the enemy was suddenly unable to withstand a single blow. It was the same this time. He was clearly no match for the army of Nanjiang country because the difference in number was too big. But on the second day, the enemy was poisoned and had no strength. They were defeated by the small army led by him and had to retreat. It was fine if it happened once or twice, but he had been in the army for several years and fought no less than dozens of battles. Every time, he felt as if he was being helped by God. This made him understand that there was an extremely powerful unknown force secretly helping him. But now, the Ling family was alone. They had no allies, and their relationship with the Wu family was like fire and water. He had been ambushed many times in the army, all by the hands of the Wu family. In the end, he had been rescued, but he had never seen the face of the person who had saved him. He didn't even know if the person was a man or a woman. This matter had always been a secret in Ling Ping's heart. He didn't even tell his mother and grandmother. "Madam, old madam, second master is back. Second master is back." When he was thinking, Ling Ping's horse had stopped at the gate of the Ling house. At this moment, the Ling house was decorated with lanterns and streamers. When the servant waiting in front of the door saw Ling Ping, he immediately shouted with joy and reported inside. Ling Ping hadn't been home for more than half a year. He couldn't stop the excitement in his eyes. He took off his helmet and threw it to the adjutant. Then he quickly entered the house. After a few steps, he saw his mother walking quickly with the help of his grandmother. Both of them were happy and excited. "Mother, Grandma," Ling Ping shouted. He strode over and knelt down. He said, "I didn't let father and grandfather down. I came back with a great victory. Good boy, get up." Mrs. Jiu burst into tears and held Ling Ping tightly. Chiu Meng also wiped her tears. There were only 2 males left in the family, and one was disabled. Ling Ping went to the battlefield. God knew how worried they were. "Ping, you must be very tired. Go in to take a bath, change clothes, and have a rest. Mother and I are here. It's not too late to talk after you have a good rest." Chiu Meng wiped the dust on Ling Ping's face. She looked distressed and said, "My poor son. He is only 20 years old, but he has to shoulder the heavy burden of the Ling family." "Mother, I am not tired." Ling Ping felt the care of his close relatives. It seemed that the tiredness on the road was swept away. He smiled warmly and said, "I haven't entered the imperial palace to meet the emperor. When I come back, I will talk with you about the family. By the way, where is Brother Li? Why didn't I see him?" Mrs. Gu's face darkened. She hit the ground with her crutch and said, "That little bastard went out with the little fatty of the Tang family in the morning. I haven't seen him yet. He is getting more and more outrageous. Since you, as his brother, have returned, you should properly discipline him." Ling Ping heard the words and smiled. He didn't feel disappointed. He said, "It's good that Brother Li is happy. As long as he doesn't do evil things, I can't blame him. It is a blessing for him to spend his life in peace." Mrs. Gu was helpless. The two brothers had a good relationship since childhood. Now Ling Ping grew up and had his own ideas. She couldn't control him. After taking a bath and changing clothes, Ling Ping changed into official clothes and went to the imperial palace in a sedan chair. He had received the routine rewards many times. He was excited at the beginning, but now he was calm and calm. The emperor seemed to see that Ling Ping was tired. He laughed and let him go. He only told him to attend the banquet at the waterside pavilion in the south of the city in the evening. Grandma, be gentle. Your grandson's ears are going to fall off. Back to the Ling mansion, Ling Ping finally heard Ling Li's familiar and exaggerated voice. Seeing that the boy was pulled by his grandma and howled, he couldn't help but laugh. He walked over and said, "Grandma, if you don't let go, Brother Li's ears will fall off." Mrs. Gu was so angry that she snorted and put down Ling Li. She pointed at him and scolded, "Look at your brother. He went to the brothel at the age of 16. He smelled of rouge. Why did the Ling family have such a little bastard like you? I'm so angry." Ling Ping understood that when he entered the imperial palace, Grandma specially sent someone to find Ling Li. Finally, she found him in the brothel alley. "Grandma, don't scold him. I will teach him a lesson." Ling Ping pushed the wheelchair and took Ling Li away quickly. Mrs. Gu was so angry that she jumped. "Ha ha 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 ha, second brother, you didn't see the top courtesan of the Hongyang house. She is so beautiful. I will take you to see her later." In the yard, Ling Ping saw Ling Xian put down the wine and dishes and stepped back to leave. He was amazed. He didn't expect that the girl became so beautiful after half a year. It was really hard for her to follow his second brother. Ling Ping straightened Ling Li's hair crown. As before, he knocked on Ling Li's knee and asked softly, still no response. Ling Li shook his head indifferently and said lazily, "Second brother, it has been so many years. Don't you find it annoying that you are still doing this?" Ling Ping's breath trembled slightly. He smiled bitterly and said, "I can't change my old habit. Perhaps your second brother's knocking will really be heard by the heavens and allow you to recover." Ling Li's eyes flashed with a vague light, but he said in a flirtatious way, "God has eyes. Why didn't I see it? If it really has eyes, will the Ling family be like this?" Ling Ping was speechless and only smiled bitterly. They were silent for a moment. Ling Ping suddenly said, "I will take you to the banquet in the evening. You are not young anymore. It's time." "Don't." Ling Li immediately interrupted and said, "It is the blind date arranged by the emperor for you. Why should I take part in it? Besides, I want to be happy for a few years. Let's talk about marrying a wife later. You can see it clearly." Ling Ping smiled. It was said that his brother was a playboy. Not only his legs were disabled, but also his brain was not good. He often made trouble for the Ling mansion. Only when he talked and laughed with his second brother could he find that his second brother was not really a playboy. But he was disabled. It seemed that he had no other choice but to be a playboy. The Ling family had been generals for generations. If his second brother became a scholar, it was undoubtedly an insult. "But second brother, I heard from Fatty Tang that the girl named Su Li is very beautiful. You must leave him for me, your younger brother. If any other lackeys fancy him, you must let me know." Ling Li said and giggled. It seemed that he thought of some extremely beautiful things. Ling Ping couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. "I just came back. You want to make trouble for me? I heard that Su Li has an extraordinary background. Don't be like Wu Xiuxiu. Otherwise, no matter how much I love you, I will never help you this time." Ling Li shrank his neck and smiled embarrassedly. "I know, second brother. I don't dare to do that. I was really scared at that time. In fact, I didn't intend to touch Wu Xiuxiu. Wu Xiuxiu automatically got into my arms. Alas. I have said this many times. You don't believe me. Forget it." Ling Li waved his hand with flagging interest and let Ling Ping leave. Ling Ping shook his head slightly and left the yard. This silly boy. Of course he believed him. His second brother was not a fool. How could he not know the consequences of insulting Wu Xiuxiu? It was just that his second brother's image of a debauchee was deeply ingrained in people's hearts. He could only suffer in silence. In order to deal with the Ling family, the Wu family has been doing everything. They can even sacrifice the reputation of their daughter. Ling Ping sneered several times. Ling Ping sneered several times. The Wu family would come back tonight. He wanted to see what new tricks they had. In the yard, the smile on Ling Li's face gradually faded. When Ling Xian confirmed that Ling Ping had left, he stood up from the wheelchair and returned to the study. At this moment, Ling Mo, dressed in black, was sitting quietly in the room. He closed his eyes and breathed faintly. Ling Ping was talking and laughing with Ling Li in the yard and didn't find him. Noticing that Ling Li came in, Ling Mo opened his eyes and stood up. He respectfully reported, "Qinglan's information is good. I took people to destroy the small stronghold of the Lianxia cult and seized a large number of bone-softening powder. I scattered it to the army of the Nanjiang country and helped Ling Ping turn defeat into victory. Second brother has doubts in these years. He has been silent all the time. It's really hard for him." Ling Li took Ling Mo's handwritten letter and read it. He couldn't help but laugh. Qinglan is actually a hands-off shopkeeper. Does he really want to train Su Qingtan as his successor? Ling Mo hesitated and asked, "His injury?" Ling Li snorted and said, "Something must have gone wrong. He still refuses to tell me. He thinks that his life belongs to himself. Is he ready to quit?" Ling Mo's face tightened and he said, "Master." Chapter 147. A Miracle-Working Doctor. Ling Mo was confused and said in a low voice, "Enchanting is back. But he is the royal preceptor. It's unclear whether he is an enemy or a friend. How can he treat Qinglan?" Ling Li shook his head and didn't say anything. He picked up a file and threw it to Ling Mo. Ling Mo took it and opened it. Suddenly, his face changed dramatically. The weird girl actually came to Yunjing. Ling Xian listened on the side. How could she not understand that they were talking about Su Li? And it seemed that both the master and Ling Mo had contact with Su Li. Thinking of this, Ling Xian suddenly said, "She is the apprentice of Xianqing. She can't distinguish friend or foe. Master, you'd better be careful." Ling Mo looked back at Ling Xian, whose beautiful eyes were full of worry. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. It seemed that it was too late to say this. The girl not only knew the origin of him and Ling Li when they met, but also behaved very strangely. It seemed that Su Li had a deep relationship with the young master. But as the sword in the young master's hand, he didn't listen to some things that he shouldn't listen to. He was not very clear about the relationship between Su Li and the young master, but he was sure that Su Li would not be the young master's enemy. The girl worked hard to make the body immune to all poisons for master. If she was the enemy, it would be ridiculous. "I'm sure that she will not be my enemy," Ling Li asserted. Ling Xian was worried, but she didn't dare to refute. She had a hunch that if she questioned the identity of Su Li again, master would be angry. The people around her haven't come yet. Although she has the identity of the lecturer of the affiliated school to cover for her recently, it's hard to guarantee that she won't be plotted against. Ling Mo, send someone to protect her secretly. Ling Li walked around and gave an order. Ling Mo suddenly felt strange. Did the girl who was full of poison need to be protected? Besides, master, did you forget that you annoyed her and were driven out of the valley by her? Ling Mo thought about these questions for a few times, but he couldn't ask them. Instead, he obediently carried out the order. He was calculating how high the cultivation of the people he needed to send to prevent Su Li from noticing the people in the dark. Ling Xian saw Ling Mo obediently leave. She gently closed her mouth and her eyes were deep. No one knew what she was thinking. In the Su house. "Big brother, do I have to go to the banquet tonight?" Su Li heard that Su Qingtan asked her to prepare clothes. She couldn't help but be slightly stunned. During the day, she heard that Ling Ping of the Ling family came back victorious. There would be a small banquet in the evening. Only the childs and daughters of prominent aristocratic families or officials of the imperial court were qualified to attend. Su Qingtan smiled gently and touched Su Li's nose. He said, "Silly girl, You are now the lecturer of the affiliated school and the junior sister apprentice of the emperor. In terms of status, who can compare to you? I, your big brother, am the one who barely meets the standard. It's all thanks to you that I was invited. Big brother, don't say that. Su Li was embarrassed and said, I heard that it was a blind date for General Ling Ping. I don't want to get married yet. Su Qingtan was stunned at first, and then he laughed and said, Girl, you haven't shown your position yet. You are Qi Xianqing's last disciple. If you don't want to marry, no one can force you. Tonight, you can go there to see the scenery of the waterside pavilion. In fact, if I didn't hear that Lord Chen Gong had returned, I wouldn't have bothered to go. Ha ha. Chen Gong. Su Li's eyes flashed. She had only been in Yunjing for a few days, but she had heard this name more than once. She must check the details of this person later. Her big brother worshipped him, but others said that he was more like a fierce tiger. Su Qingtan told Su Li to dress up quickly, and then he returned to his room to change clothes. Squeak, the wooden door made a light sound. Su Li heard the sound and looked back. She saw that Su Zipei appeared at the door as soon as Su Qingtan left. Su Zipei pinched the corner of her clothes with her hands and looked embarrassed. Third sister, come in and tell me what you want. Su Li smiled and said slowly. Su Zipei was relieved. She walked in and gently closed the door. But she couldn't stop the crazy jealousy and hatred in her heart. Until now, she found that she had fallen to the point that every word and deed needed Su Li's approval. Su Li came to Yunjing City for only 3 days, but her reputation had spread all over Yunjing. She was the last disciple of Qi Xianqing, the royal preceptor. Her beauty surpassed Wu Xiuxiu, the former first beauty in Yunjing, and she became the new first beauty in Yunjing. Not only that, she became the lecturer of the affiliated school and the first genius of the National Academy. Why? Why did all the good things fall on her head in just 3 days, and what about him? Except for the half of the jade pendant, there was nothing. Why did Su Li still get such glory without the jade pendant? Compared with Su Li, she was like a little mouse that stole something. She probed carefully on the edge, but she never got any result. Phew. Su Zipei took a breath and reluctantly emerged from the jealousy and hatred. She begged, Second sister, I also want to go to the banquet to see the world. Can you take me with you? Su Li looked up and down at Su Zipei, who had dressed up very delicately. A jade pendant loomed on her waist. It was extraordinary. It seemed that Su Zipei didn't stop to inquire about the news when she dressed up Xu Yang. The news of today's banquet just came out. She couldn't wait to hook up with a rich husband. In the previous life, Su Qingtan didn't come to Yunjing so early. She didn't know how Su Zipei hooked up with Wu Jin, who was far away in Yunjing, and even let her biological father recognize her as his daughter. But it didn't matter. In this life, she had enough time to observe. As long as Su Zipei wanted to get in touch with the rich and powerful families in Yunjing, there would always be flaws. But today, Su Li looked apologetic and said bitterly, Third sister, it's my limit to go to the waterside pavilion with the eldest brother. If I take you with me, people may think that the Su family doesn't know etiquette. I just promised the eldest brother, and I can't go back on my word. Next time, I will give the opportunity to you next time. This time, I can only. Su Zipei's face was extremely distorted when she saw Su Li's sincere and guilty look. She didn't see that Su Li was acting, but she was so sincere, which made her even more disgusted. Then, a more manic anger rose from the bottom of her heart. Without thinking, Su Zipei subconsciously slapped the beautiful face in front of her. Crack! The crisp sound resounded through the room. Su Zipei touched her right face blankly and looked at Su Qingtan, who suddenly appeared in front of her. She didn't even notice when the former arrived. Su Qingtan pulled Su Li, who looked aggrieved, behind him. His face was full of anger, like a lion that was about to bite people. Sensing that the little girl behind him pulled his sleeve, he managed to suppress his anger, but he couldn't help but scold, What's wrong with you? Why do you have to be as vicious as your mother? Get out of here. Get out of here. Su Zipei's face was pale. She was so scared that she stumbled and fell to the ground. She hurt her hand, but she didn't care about the pain. She got up and fled the room in embarrassment. Su Qingtan had time to turn around and ask about Su Li's well-being. Su Li forced a smile and said, "Eldest brother, don't be angry. Zipei is still immature. You were almost slapped in the face, but you still said good things about her." Su Qingtan showed an expression of exasperation. "She is only 1 year younger than you. Don't defend for her in the future. Your eldest brother is not blind. I don't care about what they did before for your sake, but it doesn't mean that I don't care." Su Qingtan couldn't go on, because he found that Su Li didn't listen at all. She kept bowing her head and playing with the corner of her clothes. He sighed helplessly. "Let's go. The waterside pavilion is outside the city. It's almost time to go." "Okay." Su Li immediately raised her head and responded with a smile that was brighter than the sun. Near night, the waterside pavilion in the south of the city was brightly lit. Luxurious carriages almost completely blocked the spacious flagstone road. In order to see the outstanding young general of the Ling family, more than half of the misses in Yunjing City came. What they saw was the smell of rouge. At the same time, many young talents heard the news and came. Even if Ling Ping wanted to choose a wife, he would only choose one. As long as they performed well, they would have a great chance to marry the beauty. Because it was a banquet arranged by the imperial palace, the waiters at the door and the servants were all maids and eunuchs. Su Qingtan took Su Li out of the carriage and was instantly shocked by the scene at the door. He finally knew what it meant to be crowded. If the people who came and went were not dressed in luxurious clothes, he would think that he came to the most prosperous street in Yunjing City. When they approached the door, an old eunuch with extraordinary momentum immediately came to greet them. "I have heard from His Majesty that there is a little genius in Yunjing City. Are you Miss Su Li?" Su Qingtan was shocked when he saw the old eunuch. He quickly saluted and said, "You are Eunuch Feng, the director of the imperial palace." Su Li immediately followed and saluted. The old eunuch immediately waved his hand and smiled very kindly. He said in a sharp voice, "Lord Su is so polite. In addition to arranging the banquet for General Ling, I also have an oral order from His Majesty to pass to Miss Su Li." Su Li was flattered and said, "Since it is His Majesty's oral order, Su Li will obey it." "Eunuch Feng, please tell me clearly." Eunuch Feng was very happy. This girl was much more sensible than the boy before. When he thought that the boy heard his words and turned away, so that he was punished in front of His Majesty, Eunuch Feng couldn't help but have a toothache. Thinking of this, Eunuch Feng looked at Su Li more kindly and said, "Miss Su Li, don't be nervous. It is just an order from His Majesty. If Miss Su Li is free, you can go to the Imperial Palace to see His Majesty and chat with him. His Majesty said that he hasn't seen the royal preceptor for more than 10 years and misses him very much." Su Li nodded slightly, but then shook her head and said, "My master told me that I should finish the homework in the National Book Tower as soon as possible after I arrive in the capital city. I am not allowed to enter the Imperial Palace or be distracted. Although Su Li wants to go, I can't disobey my master's order. So, I have to offend him." Eunuch Feng's face trembled and he immediately felt a toothache. Su Li didn't go after he talked for a long time. She was exactly the same as that boy. But on the surface, Eunuch Feng still showed a smile and said, "I see. Since it is an order from the royal preceptor, I will tell His Majesty truthfully." "Thank you, Eunuch Feng." Su Li bowed apologetically and watched Eunuch Feng leave. Su Qingtan was on tenterhooks. After Eunuch Feng left, he couldn't help but ask in a low voice, "Did Dr. Qi really give such an order?" Although Su Qingtan knew Qi Shenqing's identity, he was still used to calling him Dr. Qi. Su Li stuck out her tongue and replied, "Of course. Otherwise, do you think I will lie for this matter?" "No, I won't." Su Qingtan shook his head and said. He wondered why Qi Xianqing didn't let Su Li enter the imperial palace to meet the emperor. What was he worried about? After fooling Su Qingtan, Su Li felt helpless. The emperor of the Dahan country was absolutely a dangerous person. The seniors in the imperial palace were enough to make her afraid. In order not to expose too much, she could only let Qi Xianqing take the blame. Su Qingtan looked around and didn't see Chen Gong or Ling Qinglan. He couldn't help but doubt whether he was cheated by Ling Qinglan. But since they were here, It was good to go to the waterside pavilion with Su Li before the banquet began. Chapter 148. When Su Li and Su Qingtan turned around, the whole manor was so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Clang! There was a heavy sound. In front of the gate of the manor, the crowded guests had different expressions, but they all made way for them. Su Li finally saw who it was. She saw 4 sturdy men carrying a brand new huge black coffin. They walked in firmly. The sound just now was the sound of the coffin falling to the ground. Behind the coffin, there was a brother and sister in luxurious clothes. The boy was as gentle as jade with a smile on his face. The girl was extremely beautiful and mischievous. They were a perfect couple. However, the smiles of the 2 people behind the coffin would only make people feel cold and not warm at all. It's the child and daughter of the Wu family. Only the Wu family sends the coffin at the banquet of the Ling family. This is a banquet hosted by His Majesty the Emperor. Isn't young Master Wu a little too bold? Hush. Be quiet. Su Qingtan and Wu Jin immediately stood in front of Su Li. This person was not a playboy, but a talented student of the College of Martial Arts of the National Academy. Su Li's identity couldn't control him. Besides, Su Qingtan once heard from Ling Qinglan that this person was not happy without women. If he saw the second sister, it would definitely cause unnecessary trouble. Su Li gently put her hands on Su Qingtan's shoulder. She showed a pair of faint eyes, and a red light flashed in her dark pupils. Wu Jin, in this life, I finally see you. I really don't know how long you can live under my means in this life. Wu Jin didn't notice Su Li's gaze. There were at least 800 people watching the show in front of the manor. There were too many people looking at him. He couldn't distinguish all of them. Well, put it down here. Wu Jin gave an order. The 4 sturdy men immediately threw the coffin down. The coffin was extremely heavy. It fell to the ground with a loud bang. Ling Ping, who got the news, finally appeared in front of the lobby. When he saw the black wooden coffin, his face was completely gloomy. Wu Jin, do you really think that I dare not to hurt you with the protection of General Wu? With Ling Ping's words, an extremely fierce pneuma spread from him. That was the horrible killing intent condensed from killing enemies on the battlefield. The guests nearby were frightened by the momentum. Their faces turned pale in an instant and they retreated far away. Su Li was also pulled into the crowd by Su Qingtan, and there was a large empty circle in the field. Wu Jin was the first to bear the brunt. His face was slightly pale, but he did not panic. Instead, he clasped his hands and said, "Second brother Ling, why are you angry? This gift is something that I thought about for a full 3 days before I came up with. Coffins, were official positions and wealth. Both are things of fame and fortune. Is it wrong for me to congratulate second brother on his promotion and wealth?" Before Wu Jin finished his words, the girl hiding behind him immediately said, "Brother is right. Second young Master Ling, my brother has good intentions. Even if he were to stand in front of the emperor, he would still be able to reason with him. You're so angry, it's really disappointing for me and my brother." The clear and melodious voice that was like that of an oriole, coupled with the young girl's almost perfect and tender appearance, actually caused the atmosphere to slightly ease up. Many guests sighed in their hearts. Wu Xiuxiu. She really deserves the title of the former first beauty in Yunjing City. It's a pity that there is another Su Li in Yunjing City. I heard that she is really a fairy. Although Wu Xiuxiu is beautiful, she is still an ordinary person. She can't be compared with her. Maybe the voice of the last sentence was a little loud. Wu Xiuxiu suddenly turned her head and looked at the group of guests who were whispering. Her beautiful eyes were full of gloominess and anger. How could she hear that? A group of guests shrank their necks and no longer dared to speak. At this time, Ling Ping restrained his momentum and his face became calm. But his tone was still cold. "Master Wu, I appreciate your kindness. Please take this coffin back. Our Ling family can't use it." Wu Jin heard it and clapped his hands. He was full of pity and sighed, "What can we do? In order to send a gift to second brother Ling, I specially inquired about your height and size. This coffin is tailor-made for you. Other people can't fit it." As soon as he said that, the field was quiet again. Many people were shocked. Wu Jin clearly cursed Ling Ping to die on purpose. If they were to encounter such a congratulatory message that was filled with malice, they would have flown into a rage long ago. Ling Ping took a deep breath and pointed at the gate of the manor expressionlessly. For the sake of His Majesty, I won't care about the coffin with you. But if you dare to offend him again, even if His Majesty blames me, I will kill you here. Wu Jin's pupils shrank and he laughed repeatedly. Second brother Ling, don't be angry. Since I am not welcome, I will leave. But, this coffin. Boom. Before Wu Jin finished his words, Ling Ping struck with his palm. The wind from the palm scraped along Wu Jin's face. Wu Jin was in pain. Finally, the palm fell on the coffin. The coffin made of solid wood instantly became scattered sawdust. Wu Xiuxiu screamed. Wu Jin covered his red right face and looked terrible. Ling Ping smiled and showed his shining white teeth. He said, "This slap is for your father to teach you a lesson. Remember it well. Otherwise, your father will die before you one day. It's so pitiful." Ling Ping said. Wu Jin's eyes became fiercer when he heard that, but he soon calmed down. He smiled and said respectfully, "Second brother Ling, thank you for your advice. Since you don't welcome us today, we will leave now." Then, Wu Jin turned around and left. "Brother, wait for me." Wu Xiuxiu chased after him with hatred. Before leaving, she glanced at the guests next to her and saw Su Li behind Su Qingtan. Her face was really more beautiful than hers. They just looked at each other, but Wu Xiuxiu panicked for no reason. It seemed that there was a voice in her heart telling her that Su Li was her top enemy and must be eradicated as soon as possible. "Wu Xiuxiu, your eldest brother has left. Do you want to stay to attend my banquet?" Ling Ping's words suddenly came from behind. Wu Xiuxiu trembled slightly. She didn't have time to think too much and immediately turned around to chase Wu Jin, who had gone far away. The banquet returned to peace, but the atmosphere was not good. Everyone at the banquet was talking about the struggle between the Ling family and the Wu family. There was no meaning of a blind date. In addition, although the Ling family was supported by Ling Ping, it was not as powerful as the Wu family. After weighing the weight of the two families, many young ladies suddenly didn't want to play up to the Ling family. Ling Ping had never thought about getting married and having children, so his expression was normal. After drinking with everyone for a while, he went to the inner hall, as if there were important guests there. It must be Lord Chen Gong. Su Qingtan showed a regretful expression. What Ling Qinglan said was right, but he didn't say that he was not qualified to go into the inner hall to meet his idol. He came to the banquet in vain. "Eldest brother, don't be discouraged. Since that lord is your idol, he must be noble. If there is a chance in the future, there will be a chance to meet and talk with him." Su Li comforted him softly. Su Qingtan couldn't help but laugh. "You little girl, don't you know who Lord Chen Gong is? He is noble, but he is not a person who is easy to get along with. I just want to see him from a distance. As for talking with him, forget it." Su Li responded and didn't say much. She was more and more curious about who Chen Gong was. In the middle of the night, the banquet was over. Su Qingtan went back with regret. In the end, he didn't see Chen Gong coming out of the gate of the manor. The next morning, Su Li came to the affiliated school of the National Academy. There was still no one in the affiliated school. In fact, as a lecturer of the affiliated school, she could order the National Academy to inform the families and even threaten that if they didn't come, she would expel those playboys from the National Academy. But she didn't do that. She was not the senior fellow apprentice. She didn't have so many new medicines to experiment. If those playboys didn't come, she was happy to be quiet. She could hide in the alchemy room of the affiliated school to refine medicine and practice. It couldn't be more comfortable. Why did she ask for trouble? But, so many days have passed. Haven't Fang Yuan and others entered the city yet? Su Li frowned slightly. Adding up the time spent on the road, it had been a month. Fang Yuan and others didn't have the burden of the carriage of the Su family. It didn't take them much time to come to Yunjing. Why did it take so long? Although it was strange, Su Li didn't worry too much. She had told the three of them about the Hahuan sect. If they still died in the hands of the Hahuan sect, they could only blame themselves. After a day's practice, Su Li went back as usual. The afterglow of the setting sun shone on the street, which was splendid and pleasing to the eye. It seems that there are fewer people on the street today. Su Li lifted the curtain of the carriage and looked outside. Suddenly, the carriage shook and instantly sped up into the dark alley next to it. Su Li noticed it earlier and immediately jumped out of the window. She rolled a few times like a gourd. Before she could stand firm, buzz, 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 buzz. 6 arrows were shot from different directions. In the blink of an eye, all the dodging angles were blocked. Su Li's pupils shrank slightly. She shook her sleeves and a dagger slipped out. She waved the dagger to block 3 of the arrows. Then she immediately jumped away and fled deeper into the alley. At the same time, the inborn psychic awareness quietly flowed like mercury. The 9 killers in the dark immediately had no place to hide. 9 people in the acquired 9th hurdle. With her cultivation, she could deal with these people in an instant, but she couldn't do that. She wasn't sure if there were other eyes watching this scene. If she really made a move, it was very likely that she would expose herself, and that would be truly dangerous. The head of the killers hiding at the street corner outside saw Su Li escape inside and couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. Although this silly girl had the cultivation of the acquired 8th hurdle, she had little experience in fighting. She actually took the initiative to escape to a place with few people. It really saved them a lot of trouble. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Thinking of this, the head of the killers waved his hand. The other 8 killers immediately moved and rushed into the dark alley with awe-inspiring killing intent. With the inborn psychic awareness, Su Li knew the terrain very well. She could always detect the killers coming and avoid them in advance. Seeing the 9 killers scurrying in the alley like headless flies, Su Li was not very happy. She had already noticed that the structure of the alley was simple. There were only 8 exits. If the killers searched everywhere, she would definitely be found. What should she do? Suddenly, Su Li saw another person appear at the corner of the dark alley in her psychic awareness. There were no black-masked killers around. This person looked more than 40 years old. He wore a blue cloth which was very shabby. A corner of the cloth was torn off and covered his face. Obviously, he just came in with a mask and was not with the 9 people. What's the matter? Su Li frowned slightly. She clearly saw that this person's cultivation reached the peak of the acquired realm. It was impossible that he didn't know that this was a killing trap. How could he come into the alley and get involved in this mess? Seeing that the person was getting closer and closer to her hiding place, Su Li only thought for a few seconds and took the initiative to breathe heavily. Sure enough, the person was happy after hearing that and immediately rushed to Su Li. Chapter 149. The middle-aged man in blue hesitated for a moment before he approached her and said in a very low voice, "Little girl, I am here to save you. Come out quickly and leave with me." Su Li put away the dagger and stood out of the haystack with a panicked look. Seeing this, the middle-aged man in blue softened his eyes and immediately took Su Li along the alley to a locked iron gate of a courtyard. Then Su Li saw him take out a key. With the help of the middle-aged man in blue, Su Li was able to climb out of the back window of the house and left the alley without being noticed. Before she left, she saw in her psychic awareness that the 9 killers were still in the alley and were conducting a carpet search. At this moment, it was already dark and there were few people on the street. The middle-aged man in blue seemed to be worried and didn't let Su Li go home by herself. Instead, he took Su Li to walk through the streets and alleys and came to a house that looked very dilapidated. The middle-aged man in blue pushed the door open and let Su Li in. While taking off the cloth, he said, "It's too dangerous at night. This is my home. If you don't mind, you can stay here for one night and go home in the morning." Su Li saw the face of the middle-aged man in blue. It was very ordinary. He was the kind of person who would be ignored in common people. The only eye-catching thing was his messy beard. I don't mind. Su Li quickly shook her head and then made a salute. "Uncle, thank you for saving my life." The middle-aged man in blue was expressionless and didn't respond to Su Li's gratitude. He turned around and said, "I'll see if there is anything to eat in the house." This reaction made Su Li slightly stunned. It seemed that the middle-aged man's temperament was a bit interesting. He was serious in speech and manner and seemed to have a heart of stone. He didn't seem to be the kind of person who would save people, but he saved her. Interesting. Su Li thought of this and followed the middle-aged man in blue into the house. What she saw made her stunned again. Was there really someone living in this place? The seemingly spacious main hall of the house had no other furniture except a table and 2 chairs. It was empty as if it had been emptied. Su Li went to the inner room and saw that there was nothing but a bed in the room, not even clothes. At this time, the middle-aged man in blue came out with 2 bowls of noodles and placed them on the table. He said in an old-fashioned voice, "Come and have some noodles." The voice seemed to lack the emotions of a human and sounded more like a robot. Su Li heard the sound and came out. Seeing 2 bowls of simple water on the table, she didn't show any other strange expression. She sat down and picked up the chopsticks to eat. Such a reaction made the middle-aged man in blue surprised. It seemed that in his guess, Su Li was dressed like a daughter of a noble family. Even if Bai Shui had good self-restraint, she couldn't eat it. Sensing the gaze of the middle-aged man in blue, Su Li smiled and said, "Although I am dressed like this, I didn't even have a meal when I was a child." The white water surface was already very good. "By the way, eldest uncle, I haven't asked for your name yet." "My name is Su Li. I forgot to tell you my name just now." "I'm sorry." "Su Li." The eyes of the middle-aged man in blue suddenly became sharp. "Which Su Li?" "Su Li of the National Academy." Su Li smiled embarrassedly. "I didn't expect you to recognize me." The middle-aged man in blue didn't want to chat with Su Li. Instead, he looked at her with burning eyes and said in a cold voice, "Do you know the background of those killers?" Su Li was stunned. The tone of the middle-aged man in blue reminded her of some unpleasant past events. Seeing Su Li's silence, the middle-aged man in blue came to his sense. Su Li was not his prisoner. He smiled bitterly in his heart and reluctantly pulled the corner of his mouth, revealing a smile that he thought was kind but was actually as scary as a ghost. "I scared you. Those killers are likely to be related to the case I am investigating, so I am a little excited. Miss Su, please don't blame me." Su Li's eyes flashed, but her tone was naive. "Investigation? Are you also a member of the Supreme Judiciary, like my eldest brother?" The middle-aged man in blue was silent for a moment and then said, "In addition to the Supreme Judiciary, there is another place to investigate cases. I am Chen Gong of the Ministry of Penalty." Su Li's pupils shrank slightly. This person was the ruthless official of the Ministry of Penalty. Su Qingtan repeatedly mentioned the name of Chen Gong, so she went to the National Book Tower to check it today. Then she knew that Chen Gong was a famous ruthless official of the Dahan country. He was noble and upright. He never accepted bribes and his family was as poor as a church. On the other hand, he used cruel means to torture prisoners. Even the subordinates of the Ministry of Penalty couldn't stand it. Every family in the Dahan country even used the name of Chen Gong to frighten their children. He was really a ruthless person who could stop children from crying. However, Su Li looked at the plain noodles cooked by Lord Chen, whose hands were full of blood. It seemed that he was not as ruthless as the rumor said. However, his family was really as poor as a church. It was appropriate to use the 4 bare walls to describe the situation. "It seems that you have heard of this name. If you can't eat the noodles, don't eat them." Chen Gong's voice was flat. There was no joy or sorrow on his face. No one could know what he was thinking. Su Li smiled and took another mouthful of noodles. When Chen Gong's expression changed slightly, she analyzed, "I am not very clear about the background of the 4 people. I just saw that there were few people on the street, so I was alert. Later, the carriage suddenly got out of control. I jumped out of the carriage in time. But I was too scared at that time and hid in the alley when I saw it." Chen Gong frowned. He didn't get any clue from Su Li's words. When he looked up, he saw the girl stick out her tongue. His heart softened unconsciously. If she was still alive, Their daughter should be 12 or 13 years old. After eating the noodles, Su Li took the initiative to clean up the dishes. Chen Gong looked at her petite back. His eyes, full of vicissitudes, were full of bitterness. He murmured, "You don't allow me to bring a woman back. This girl is 1 or 2 years older than our daughter. She shouldn't be counted." After cleaning up quickly, Su Li returned to the house, but she didn't see Chen Gong. She spread out her psychic awareness and found that there was a room behind the house. She immediately looked for it and walked to the door. Before she stepped in, she heard a cold shout inside the door, "Stop." It was Chen Gong. Su Li stopped and retreated to the door again. But it didn't prevent her from seeing the scene in the room clearly. Were those lanterns? There were all kinds of colorful lanterns in the room. They were all connected with ropes and hung in the air. The ground was covered with the traces of burning candles, which were very thick. It seemed that the candles had been burned dozens or even hundreds of times. Chen Gong stood in the lanterns with his back to Su Li. He didn't say anything, but Su Li could feel his breath, which was heavy and decadent. After a while, Su Li didn't disobey Chen Gong's order and turned away. She rested in the room for a night and didn't see Chen Gong come back. It seemed that he stood in the room for a whole night. At dawn the next day, Su Li got up and tidied up the floor. When she came to the kitchen, she saw that there was nothing except flour. She couldn't help but roll her eyes. It was rare that Chen Gong had the strength to investigate the case even though he ate plain water every day. Walking to the vegetable field in the backyard, Su Li finally found a few cabbages and onions. She picked them and added some fresh seasonings she carried with her. Soon, 2 bowls of fragrant Yangchun noodles were made. When Su Li put the noodles on the table, Chen Gong came out from the back room. He sniffed and saw 2 bowls of Yangchun noodles on the table. He couldn't help but be stunned. "Uncle Chen, I can't repay you for saving my life yesterday. I can only make a bowl of noodles as a token of appreciation." Su Li took the chopsticks and handed them to him with a bright smile. "I haven't cooked for a long time. Have a taste, uncle." Chen Gong lowered his head and hesitated for a moment. Then he took the chopsticks and picked up the noodles. He took a bite and chewed it. Then he started to eat. The sound of slurping was endless. Seeing that he was eating happily, Su Li immediately handed her bowl to him. Chen Gong didn't refuse. He took it and continued to eat. His cheeks were bulging, and he didn't say a word from beginning to end. Soon, the second bowl was finished. Su Li smiled and squinted her eyes. She would be very happy if someone liked to eat what she cooked. "Uncle, wait for me. I'll cook again." Then Su Li got up and went to the kitchen. When she turned her back, she didn't see the stern middle-aged official behind her. He lowered his head and wiped his face with his hands. In the kitchen, Su Li took the flour and poured it out. Chen Gong suddenly appeared at the door and said in a deep voice, "It's enough. You go back and tell your family that you are safe. I'm leaving." Before Su Li replied, Chen Gong turned around and went into the room. It didn't take long for him to change into an official uniform and leave the yard. The door of the yard was not locked. Su Li stopped what she was doing. Her eyes were shining. Chen Gong, whom her eldest brother worshipped, seemed to be a little interesting. After cleaning up and closing the gate of the courtyard, Su Li returned to the Su house along the busy street. Su Qingtan just came back after a night's search. He was anxious in the room. Seeing Su Li come back safe and sound, he was overjoyed and hugged Su Li tightly. "You little girl, I didn't see you all night. Do you want me to die of worry? Eldest brother, I almost couldn't come back." Su Li's nose turned sour and tears fell down. Su Qingtan felt distressed. He quickly coaxed her and listened to what happened yesterday. "Were there killers? Did Lord Chen Gong save you?" Su Qingtan was full of fear. If Chen Gong didn't save Su Li, he didn't dare to think about the consequences yesterday. Second sister didn't offend anyone in Yunjing. How could there be killers? Su Qingtan was puzzled. He had tried his best to let Su Li live in seclusion. She didn't go to other places except the National Academy. Even at the banquet last time, he tried his best to stop Su Li from being seen by the people of the Wu family. In this way, there was still trouble. For the first time, Su Qingtan felt that the forces in Yunjing City were full of malice. It doesn't matter, eldest brother. After this, I will go to the crowded street and won't take a carriage casually. I believe that those bad guys won't be so rampant to kill me in broad daylight. Su Li comforted him softly. Su Qingtan couldn't help but sigh. She was in danger, but she comforted him. Li, you finally come back. We are worried about you. Su Huanli appeared outside the door. When he saw Su Li, his eyes brightened. He immediately came in and said, "By the way, Li, the new place of the Baiwei building has been selected. The new site of the Baiwei building has been selected. You can go there today to see if it is suitable. If it is suitable, immediately design the kitchen boiler. I will order someone to repair it." Su Qingtan frowned and said in a low voice, "Father, second sister just escaped from death. She needs a rest. The matter of the Baiwei building is not urgent. Let's talk about it later." "What later?" Su Huanli suddenly became angry and loudly scolded, "You are not in charge of the family. You don't know the price of daily necessities. Our Su family has moved to Yunjing for a month. The maids needed money, the servants also needed money, and the food, clothing, and daily necessities all needed money. And the medicine for your first aunt's injury is not cheap. If it goes on like this, we will all have nothing to eat." Chapter 150. Look, your second sister said so. Su Huanli's face brightened and he was not angry anymore. He immediately pulled Su Li to go out. Su Qingtan was helpless. He pointed at Su Li for a long time without saying anything. Finally, he could only say with concern, "Be careful on the way." "I know, eldest brother." Su Li smiled sweetly and left with Su Huanli in the carriage. After they left, Su Qingtan looked a little gloomy. He must find out the killer. Otherwise, he always felt uncomfortable being stared at in the dark. Su Huanli took Su Li to the most prosperous Zhongtan Street in Yunjing City. This road was the main road of Yunjing City. It was connected with the gate of Yunjing City and the gate of the Imperial City. It was the most crowded place in the entire Yunjing City. Every year, the Imperial Court's sacrifice team would pass here. The rent was astronomical, and the Su family could not afford it at all. "Father, do you want to buy a shop on this street?" Su Li couldn't help but ask. Su Huanli's face trembled and he scolded with a smile, "You little girl, what nonsense are you talking about? How can our Su family afford to buy a shop on Zhongtan Street?" While talking, the carriage drove into the alley on the side of Middle Altar Street and passed through to the second-class back Altar Street. There were not many things here, but there were many inns, restaurants, and wineries. Moreover, because of the terrain, people could still see the good scenery of Zhongtan Street from the second floor of Hutan Street as long as there were no tall buildings blocking the view. Su Huanli pointed to the empty two-story shop with 3 windows at the corner of the street and said, "Look, it is the best place in the whole Hutan Street. Your grandma and I think that the location of the Baiwei building can't be bad. Let's rent this restaurant for 3 months first. It's not too late to buy it after we earn enough money." Su Li's eyes flashed. She didn't expect that Su Huanli was smart in business and chose such a good location. "Father, how much is the rent of this shop a month?" Su Huanli was excited and said, "It's 10,000 taels a month. Li, you have to work hard to earn back the rent every month. Otherwise, I will lose a lot." Although he said so, Su Huanli's face was red. The taste of the beggar's chicken and the location of the restaurant were natural advantages. The business couldn't be bad. "I will do my best." After Su Li entered the shop, she was busy designing the kitchen boiler and adjusting the layout of the building. A day passed unconsciously. Under her adjustment, the ordinary decoration of the restaurant with no highlights became fresh and elegant with the embellishment of potted ornaments, which made people's eyes light up. "All right. You deserve to be my daughter. You are good at doing business." "Ha ha." Su Huanli laughed heartily. Now, only the plaque of the restaurant and the back kitchen were not ready. After these 2 things were ready, he could open the restaurant on a good day. When Su Li went to the second floor, she was surprised to see the name of a restaurant diagonally opposite. "Solitary Abode." The name of the Baiwei building was the same as that of the Baiwei building, and it was suppressed by the name of the Baiwei building. When the Baiwei building was built, the Baiwei building and the Baiwei building would be at loggerheads with each other. Troubles were inevitable. However, she didn't remind Su Huanli. How much the Su family earned had nothing to do with her, right? In the next 2 days, Su Li resumed her normal life. She practiced hard in the affiliated school every day. There were enough elixirs in the affiliated school. Her cultivation changed almost every day. In just a few days, she jumped from the inborn 3rd hurdle to the inborn 5th hurdle. The reason was that she had accumulated in the inborn 3rd hurdle. But this speed was really shocking. It overturned the saying that the cultivation progress was slow after the inborn hurdle. When Su Li was striving to reach the inborn 6th hurdle, Fang Yuan and the other 2 finally came to Yunjing City. They didn't go to find Su Li immediately. Instead, they left the people of the Tianya house and bought a yard in the city as a temporary place to rest. Not long after they entered the city, the news came to Ling Li's ears. It's 10 days late, and they disappeared immediately after entering the city. Ling Li rubbed his chin and smiled slightly. She finally used the wooden token he left. However, it was not a good thing that Su Li moved the secret force into the city. Thinking of the news from the Tianya house, Ling Li frowned. The situation in Yunjing City was getting more and more complicated. Master, Su Li was assassinated 2 days ago. Finally, she was rescued by Chen Gong. Our people didn't help her. Ling Mo meant that the group of killers actually couldn't do anything to Su Li. Ling Li said, "What is her cultivation?" Ling Li glanced at Ling Xian, who was listening quietly, and said, "The acquired 8th hurdle." Hearing this, Ling Xian's eyes instantly relaxed a lot, but it was not seen by Ling Mo and Ling Li. Ling Li heard it and smiled. Half a year ago, she had reached the peak of the acquired hurdle. She could refine elixirs and help him jump 2 hurdles in the inborn hurdle. If Su Li hadn't reached the inborn hurdle after such a long time, it would be a joke. But Ling Li was not sure what realm Su Li had reached. He estimated that she had at least reached the inborn 3rd hurdle. Ling Mo and Ling Xian practiced with him since childhood, but they were just in the inborn 4th hurdle. Besides, the Baiwei building of the Su family is about to open. Ling Mo reminded him. Ling Li smiled and said, "It seems that second brother has to be a shield." Su Li's name was well known in Yunjing. Fang Yuan and the other 2 didn't ask much but got all the news about Su Li. They couldn't help but be speechless. They ate dirt and dust on the road, but Su Li lived a comfortable life. The 3 made do with a dinner and had a comfortable sleep. The next day, they finally recovered their spirits and began to look for a new location for the Linli building. Su Li had a requirement for the new location of the Linli building. It must not be within 10 miles of the imperial city. She couldn't choose any place within 10 miles of Yunjing City. Because the ground of Yunjing City within 10 miles was extremely hard white stone. It was too difficult to dig out an underground space. The wine of the Linli building was unique. It was not afraid that other wineries would follow suit. Even if the location was a little remote, it didn't matter. People who liked wine would come to the Linli building. There were many shops that met Su Li's requirements. The 3 shopped for a long time and selected 10 shops. Finally, they decided to let Su Li decide. At midnight, a dart was shot on the edge of Su Li's bed. Su Li opened her eyes and took down the dart. She opened the note tied to it. It was a word Fang. Su Li put on the black clothes and listened to Su Qingtan's voice for a while. After confirming that Su Qingtan was in a deep sleep, she flew to the roof like a night elf and flew straight to the direction where the dart came from. It didn't take long for her to find Fang Yuan hiding in the dark of the alley. Fang Yuan didn't see Su Li for a long time. He stood up in a panic. When he was about to speak, Su Li covered his mouth with her fingertips and transmitted the sound in silence. Yunjing City is not like the Qinghe town. It is dangerous at night. Don't make a sound. Take me to your yard first. Fang Yuan calmed down and nodded slightly. Then he flashed out to lead the way. After a while, Su Li took off the black hood and looked at the yard. She praised, "It's very good." The location of the yard is secluded. It's a good place to stay. Chu Qingning and Yin Shuotong heard the sound and came out. They were happy to see Su Li. Although all of them had good brains and good cultivation, if they didn't have Su Li as the backbone, they would be in a state of disunity. They couldn't form a fighting force at all. Let's go in and talk about it. Su Li stretched out her hands and used her psychic awareness to explore the surroundings. Then she took them into the yard with confidence. There were too many seniors in Yunjing City. The inborn fifth hurdle was at most the upper level. She had to be careful. In the study, the four people sat opposite to each other. Yin Shuotong carefully took out the yellow and wrinkled thin paper from the wooden box and said, "Fortunately, we got there in time. After we got it by some means, we were chased by the officers and soldiers the next day." Lin Xiong had died in the exile team. Seeing so many thin papers, Su Li couldn't help but stare. She picked up one of them and looked at it carefully. "There is another thing worth noting," Chu Qingning added with a strange look. Lin Yanxing disappeared. When we went there, we didn't see him. It seemed that he disappeared directly from the team. If he is alive, we don't see him. If he is dead, we don't see his corpse. It's really weird. Su Li glanced at the 3 words Hongchen powder on the thin paper. Her eyes flashed with extremely bright light. She said lightly, "Don't worry about Lin Yanxing. He has some qualifications. It's not strange that he is taken away by people in the martial arts circle. Those sects disdain killing in the secular world. Most of them, Lin Yanxing will do it himself later. But Yang Hongxiu has a spiritual bow. I also gave Yang Zai a lucky chance. It's hard to say whether Lin Yanxing can save the brother and sister." Fang Yuan was at ease and was not surprised. Su Li always liked to arrange all things well. It seemed that she could predict the future. Even if there was an accident, she would quickly find a remedy. This was the charm of her personality. "Well, let's not talk about that." Su Li put the thin paper close to her body and then said, "When you entered the city today, did you go to see the site of the Linli building?" "Of course." Chu Qingning immediately became complacent. He took out the map of Yunjing City from his arms and spread it on the table. There were 10 red circles marked on the map. They were the last 10 after they screened. Su Li slightly squinted her eyes. Without hesitation, she pointed at one of them. Yin Shuotong came over to have a look and felt strange. They had eliminated this shop before. The land was a little expensive, and the shop was in the alley. No one could see it at all. Why did Su Li take a fancy to it? "Just do as I said." Su Li marked the location again. She had thought about it a long time ago. She asked Fang Yuan and others to find it just to deceive others, especially to deceive a shop. This time, you come to the underground Aditum in person. Don't let the craftsman find it. And you have to guard against the spying of the next shop. This shop is next to a winery. It is opened by a couple who have reached the inborn realm. You have to be careful. Su Li warned. Fang Yuan and others immediately narrowed their eyes. 2 inborn masters opened a winery. Was it a joke? How about? Chu Qingning rubbed his hands and said with a smile, "How about changing the place?" He was a little flustered to open the Linli building full of secrets next to 2 inborn seniors. Su Li smiled and said, "How can that be? I am going to invite those 2 people to join me. If I change the place, I will have no chance at all." "That's settled. You 3 should start work early. My identity is quite sensitive now. It's not appropriate for me to show up too much." Fang Yuan nodded and said, "Don't worry. I won't let you worry too much." He already had some clues about the 3rd hurdle of AO sword skills. Presumably, in a few months, he could surpass Luochen and become the 2nd inborn senior of the Linli building. At this moment, he still didn't know that Luochen had become an inborn senior from AO sword skills in the secluded place of Dorwang village. That night, Su Li quietly returned to the Su house. Fortunately, she didn't meet anyone who worked at night. The opening of the Baiwei building and the Linli building were in full swing. Thanks to Su Qingtan, Su Li didn't need help from either side. She still commuted between the Su house and the National Academy every day. Chapter 151. Crackle. After a string of loud firecrackers, the new Baiwei building was surrounded by diners who came to watch the fun. Before the opening of the Baiwei building, they had heard the news that this restaurant was related to Su Li, the first talented girl in Yunjing City. Su Li was famous. At this moment, some romantic talents who heard the news all came to see if they could see Su Li. Su Huanli, who was dressed in red clothes, was full of joy. He stood in front of the door and bowed with his hands folded in front. Then he raised his head and said loudly, "I am Su Huanli, and Su Li is my second daughter. Today is the first day of the opening of the Baiwei building. All the wine and dishes are half price." As soon as Su Huanli finished his words, the newly recruited waiters of the restaurant immediately came out to greet the guests. They even said Su Li. Obviously, they were ordered by Su Huanli. Miss Su is not only good at poetry, but also good at cooking. The signature dishes of this restaurant are all developed by Miss. That's right. Miss Su's cooking is comparable to that of the god of cookery. Any ingredients in her hands can be turned into magic. It's delicious. The waiters tried their best to brag. Many people who had watched the fun became interested and followed the crowd into the Baiwei building. In the blink of an eye, the Baiwei building was full. The smell of the beggar's chicken filled the street. More and more people came here following the smell. It was exactly the same as when the restaurant was opened in the Desu town. Su Huanli saw that the business of the store was very good on the first day, and he was very happy. The older, the wiser. If his mother didn't ask him to use the name of Su Li to attract customers, he really couldn't think of this trick. Su Li was asked to help in the shop by Su Huanli. She saw it but didn't say much. Because she knew that even if she went up and said it, she would only get a scolding from Su Huanli. Moreover, Su Huanli didn't realize that it was not the Yunjing city where he could do whatever he wanted. Su Li smiled faintly and glanced at the deserted house diagonally opposite. Before the opening of the Baiwei building, the business of the house was quite good. But today, the Baiwei building's wine and dishes were half price, and the taste was good. It would definitely affect the business of the house. Presumably, the owner of the house should be angry at this moment. The owner of the one-way residence was indeed furious. To be precise, he was so furious that he wanted to kill someone. A bunch of trash. If you can't even compare to a country bumpkin's restaurant, then what use do I have for you? Guards. Drag them away and feed them to the dogs. Young miss, please spare my life. Spare me. Wu Xiuxiu put her hands on her hips and pointed at the large group of waiters and shopkeepers kneeling in front of her. She was so angry that her chest was heaving and her face was pale. She was the owner of Yiji House. Ordinary people didn't have the right to know this information, but anyone with a bit of status and background knew it clearly. Su Li had just been in Yunjing City for a month. She was the most talented woman and the most beautiful woman in Yunjing City. Now even her restaurant was completely suppressed. Where would she put her face? If this could be tolerated, what could be tolerated? Little sister. Don't be impatient, this matter is not entirely their fault. Wu Jin comforted his sister in a gentle voice. He turned his head and his expression immediately became cold. You can avoid the death penalty, but you can't escape the punishment. Go and receive the punishment. Upon hearing this, the panic-stricken shopkeeper was overjoyed. He immediately knelt down and kowtowed. He was moved to tears. Thank you, young master. Thank you for sparing my life, young master. As he said that, he immediately led his subordinates and left in fear. Brother. Wu Xiuxiu waved Wu Jin's hand and pouted. She was full of grievance. Su Li is clearly bullying me. My restaurant is called Yiji House, and her restaurant is called Baiwei Building. She also took away all my business. How can your sister face others in the future? Wu Jin couldn't help but laugh. He touched his sister's hair and teased, You already have a way, don't you? You sent Anjiu and others out without telling me. If my father knows it, you will suffer. Wu Xiuxiu's face turned golden, and then she smiled embarrassedly. She pinched the corner of her clothes and said, Xiu was angry, and nothing happened. Wu Jin's face suddenly became cold. He reprimanded her, Xiu, you are too insensible this time. Anzhou and others are the secrets of our Wu family. If they are exposed to the Ling family or other families in the imperial court, do you know the consequences? Oh. Wu Xiuxiu stamped her feet. She was angry and said, I am angry. Su Li is just a servant girl from a poor family. How can she compete with me? Brother, you don't help me. You even blame me. Are you still my brother? As she said, Wu Xiuxiu's eyes turned red. Wu Jin wiped away her tears helplessly. If I don't love you, who else will? Of course, I will help you with Su Li's business. But don't act alone in the future, in case you give yourself away. Do you understand? Wu Xiuxiu immediately smiled through tears. She hugged Wu Jin's waist and said coquettishly, I thought you were reluctant to hurt her because she was beautiful. Wu Jin gently stroked his sister's soft hair. A glimmer of light flashed through his eyes. He whispered, how could it be? Even if there are 10,000 Su Li, she can't compare with my Xiu. Ha ha ha, brother, you are lying. Wu Xiuxiu immediately laughed happily. In this world, even her parents' love for her was less than half of that of her brother. It was great that she could be her brother's sister. Last time, Anzhou and others failed. I have helped you find out the reason. Wu Jin touched Wu Xiuxiu's small nose and said, do you know that Anzhou almost fought with Chen Gong? If Chen Gong didn't have scruples because of Su Li, he would have noticed it. Wu Xiuxiu's eyes flashed with fear. She immediately said angrily, how could that bitch be so lucky? One of the houses in the alley is Chen Gong's ancestral house. I just happened to meet it. Wu Jin shook his head and said, and Su Li is smart enough. After escaping, she didn't call a carriage on the road. She always walks in the downtown streets. It is not good to take action for the time being. How can it be? Wu Xiuxiu's happy face suddenly disappeared. Her beautiful eyes were full of fierce light. She said, brother, you should take action as soon as possible. I don't want to see that face one more day. Wu Jin sighed helplessly and turned to look at the door of the Baiwei building. Suddenly, he saw two familiar figures. His pupils suddenly shrank. How could they appear here? Ling Ping calmly pushed the wheelchair into the Baiwei building. Ling Li, who was full of evil, was sitting in the wheelchair. As soon as they entered the door, the noisy hall of the restaurant immediately fell into a dead silence. Even the rich childs who were eating and drinking were frightened. They stopped what they were doing and became stiff. How could they come here? Seeing this, Ling Ping couldn't help but smile bitterly in his heart. When did this guy know to be shy? He insisted that Ling Ping accompany him to come here. Didn't he know how sensational it would be if he appeared with me? Thinking of this, Ling Ping showed a gentle smile on his face and said, today, I just come to eat with my brother. His words were like a stone thrown into a calm lake. Many childs who claimed to be talents immediately threw away a handful of broken silver and fled from another door. In the blink of an eye, more than half of the people on the first floor left. Su Huanli's hands were tired from receiving money. He saw many broken silver on the table. He was happy. Regardless of the identity of the two people who came, he immediately went to them. He rubbed his hands and said with a smile, guests, do you want to eat or stay here? He said two people, but actually he looked at Ling Ping. One of them was as calm as an official, and the other was a disabled man with messy clothes. Ling Ping knew who he should ask even if he thought with his toes. But this time, he was obviously wrong. Old guy, are you blind? An angry shout almost scared Su Huanli to jump up. He looked down and was immediately sprayed by Ling Ping's saliva. Damn you! Don't you see me? Ask your daughter to come out and serve me dishes and wine. Otherwise, I will tear down your restaurant. Su Huanli was stunned by the scolding. It was the first time for him to see such an arrogant master who would tear down the restaurant. His heart was filled with rage, but before he could vent it out, a waiter trembled as he walked forward and stuttered, General Ling, young Master Ling, Miss. Miss is in the private room on the second floor. Please come in. Ling Li heard it and smiled. He pointed at the waiter and said fiercely, what are you waiting for? Show me the way. The waiter was startled and immediately rushed to the second floor. Ling Ping shook his head helplessly. His brother's temper couldn't be changed. Fortunately, He knew to threaten Ling Ping. In the past, he was arrogant and thought that everyone in the world knew him. Wherever he went, he would tear down the restaurant and make the Ling family lose a lot of money. Seeing Ling Ping lift the wheelchair with one hand and go upstairs, Su Huanli came to his sense in a daze. His body seemed to be blown by the cold wind and he couldn't help shivering. He caught a frightened waiter and asked about the background of the person. He was instantly stunned. Just now, he almost scolded the most arrogant master in the whole Yunjing city. The Baiwei building was almost torn down. For a moment, Su Huanli was extremely grateful to the waiter who interrupted him. There was no anger in his heart, but only a deep uneasiness. Su Li should not make that person angry. Entering the private room on the second floor, Ling Ping saw Su Li sitting and waiting here. He couldn't help but be amazed. Last time, he was upset at the banquet and didn't pay attention to her. Now the environment was changed. He really felt that this woman was as beautiful as the rumor said. She deserved the first title in Yunjing City. I'm Su Li, nice to meet you. General Ling and Master Ling. Su Li stood up and bowed slightly. Her voice was as ethereal as a bird and natural and graceful. Ling Ping praised her secretly. He pushed Ling Li into the room and said with a smile, Miss Su Li, you don't have to be so polite. I come here today because my brother has admired you for a long time. He especially comes here to catch up with you. Although Ling Ping said the polite words, he felt pity in his heart. Although Brother Li was the best brother in his heart, to be honest, how could Brother Li deserve such an excellent woman? He was over 20 years old, and Brother Li was 17 years old. Both of them didn't get married and had children. His mother and grandmother were worried. It was not difficult for him to find a wife with his glory. However, Brother Li was handicapped and had a foppish temperament. Any family that was slightly particular would not be willing to marry their daughter to him. As for those who harbored evil intentions and wanted to enter the Ling family, mother and grandmother were worried that they would mistreat Brother Li. Ling Ping remembered that his mother heard that Brother Li liked someone and wanted to see her. She was so happy and specially asked him to help. Alas, Su Li glanced at the playboy who was sitting in the wheelchair and drooling. She couldn't help but laugh and said, General Ling, I'm really flattered. But the identity of your brother. I'm afraid that I don't have the luck to enjoy it. As the hierarch of the Enmore cult, she really didn't have the luck to enjoy it. Ling Ping smiled bitterly. Su Li's words were naturally disgusting to him. Ling Li was angry. Su Li. It was rare for him to find a chance to see her. How could she push him away? Brother, you go out first. I'll talk to Miss Su Li in person. Chapter 152. I see. Ling Li impatiently pushed Ling Ping away. He was extremely bad-tempered. Ling Ping left the room and looked back several times. He sighed in his heart that the boy was so rude and left a worse impression on Su Li. How could he get the beauty back? Don't peep or eavesdrop. Suddenly, Ling Ping heard Ling Li's voice behind him. He almost fell down. His face suddenly darkened. Originally, he really wanted to listen to what they could say, but now he was pointed out by Ling Li, so he was not interested. They were at odds with each other, so they definitely couldn't talk together. It was estimated that Brother Li would be driven out soon. After Ling Ping went out, Ling Li tilted his head and pushed the wheelchair to Su Li. His original vulgar and thirsty expression became light and gentle. His eyes that were wandering on Su Li's body became calm. He immediately became a different person from the playboy he was a moment ago. Su Li raised her eyebrows and teased, Childling, your acting skills are very good. Ling Li spread his psychic awareness and saw that Ling Ping had gone to the window on the second floor to drink. His eyes lit up and he lowered his voice. It is not difficult for you to see the situation of the Ling family. I was poisoned when I was a child. It happened, so. Su Li looked indifferent. Stop. I am not interested in your past. What do you want me to do? I told you in the Desu town that we would never meet again. It seems that you are forgetful. Ling Li frowned slightly. He felt that Su Li was estranged from him. It seemed that she didn't want to have anything to do with him. However, his own situation. It was good that she didn't get involved. Ling Li smiled indifferently and finally put away the different feeling in his heart. He assumed the posture of a hierarch of a big sect and said, "How about making a fair deal? How much do I need to pay to cure Ling Qinglan?" Su Li smiled sweetly. "Qinghu? He is your right-hand man. If you want a fair deal, I am afraid that Hierarch Ling can't afford it." Ling Li looked calm and his eyes were firm. He said, "Go ahead." No matter how much he paid, he would save Ling Qinglan. No one was suitable for the position of Qinghu except him. Su Li sat down against Ling Li and stretched out a finger. "I want the full moon." Swish. Ling Li was horrified and shocked. Even if he knew that Su Li would embarrass him, he did not expect that she would make such an excessive request. "You're making things difficult for me." Ling Li made a low growl in his throat, but Su Li smiled brightly. "Is there anything in the world that Hierarch Ling finds difficult? Yunjing City is your territory. If the treasures auctioned in your territory fall into the hands of others, isn't it a joke?" The full moon was the legendary treasure that would be auctioned in the Yunjing auction house 1 month later. It was said that this treasure could open up the dantian of the purple mansion of the full moon and break the shackles of heaven and earth. It could break through to a higher realm without leaving the secular world and improve the power of understanding. It was really a rare treasure. The only regretful thing was that this treasure was a natural spirit pill, and it possessed an extreme yin and cold nature. Only women could consume it. If a man were to consume it, he would immediately be frozen into a popsicle. Even so, there were many talented girls in the martial arts circle. A full moon was enough to set off a reign of terror in Yunjing City. Even if the Enmore cult intervened, it would be difficult for them to escape unscathed. Ling Li originally wanted to wait and see, and then look for opportunities. Whether he could get the treasure or not depended on his luck. But Su Li's words made it necessary to get the full moon. If Ling Qinglan's life can't even be compared with a full moon, how can it be fair? Su Li smiled leisurely. "In addition to the full moon, you also need to prepare a branch of the Kurong tree." Kurong tree? Ling Li was confused. "I have never heard of this name. Besides, aren't your requirements too much?" Su Li got close to Ling Li's ear and whispered, "In the words of your hometown, it is the branch of the phoenix perches on the phoenix tree. In short, it is almost the same. Only when I find that thing, Ling Qinglan's life can be saved. Otherwise, even if I don't have the panacea, how can I detoxify?" Ling Li's eyelids twitched, and his eyes were full of complexity. "Why do you say that my hometown is not here?" Su Li got close to Ling Li and almost hugged him, which made the latter couldn't help but hold his breath. Su Li noticed it and chuckled softly. She touched his lips with her fingertips, which were cold to the touch. She said, "Because you told me in person a long, long time ago." Ling Li's heart beat faster, but he didn't expect that she was joking. He couldn't help but move Su Li's fingertips away angrily. There was a trace of anger in his voice. "Forget it if you don't want to say it. Don't beat around the bush. What I said is true." Su Li sighed softly in her heart. She stood up straight and said coldly, "Only when you see those two things, Ling Qinglan can be saved. Child Ling, please go back." Ling Li turned the wheelchair expressionlessly. Suddenly, he felt that the person behind him grabbed the handle of the wheelchair and gently pushed it up. In a trance. He seemed to have seen this scene before. Was it a dream? Suddenly, Su Li transmitted the sound in silence coldly in his heart and interrupted his recollection. The Lianxia cult and the Hehuan sect are not easy to deal with. If you are not strong enough, don't force yourself. I don't want the body of immunity to all poisons I made by myself to die in vain. Hearing the former's cold transmission, Ling Li smiled and couldn't help but transmit the sound in silence. I cherish my life more than anyone else. Miss Su, if you have time to care about others, you'd better think about your own situation. Before he finished his words, Ling Li suddenly felt a strong force behind him. The wheelchair was pushed far away and almost hit the door. Ling Li was immediately angry. When he was about to speak, he heard Su Li deliberately raised her voice. Child Ling and I are not the same kind of people. We don't agree with each other. Child Ling, please go back. You. Ling Li stared slightly. The next moment, Ling Ping opened the door as expected. Feeling the unpleasant atmosphere in the room, he couldn't help but smile bitterly. He pushed Ling Li to apologize and went downstairs. You win. Hearing the last sentence from the playboy in the wheelchair, Su Li suddenly laughed. She laughed so much that she couldn't stand up straight. Drops of tears fell on the ground. Finally, no one knew whether she was crying or laughing. Su Huanli and Su Li returned to the Su house at 9 o'clock. The former was jubilant, while the latter was calm as usual. Su Qingtan had been waiting at the door for a long time. When he saw the carriage coming back, he was relieved and went to greet them. Qingtan, you didn't see it. The restaurant just opened today, and it was full of guests. If it wasn't for the half price on the first day, the profit could be at least 2,000 taels. It won't take long for our Su family to buy that shop and gain a firm foothold in Yunjing City. Su Qingtan was also happy for his family. He pulled Su Li and said, Father, second sister, you must be tired. Go in and have a rest. Since the business of the Baiwei building is stable, let second sister go to the National Academy. She can't fall behind in her studies. Su Huanli was unhappy when he heard that. Today, because Su Li showed up from time to time in the restaurant, the business was so good. If Su Li was not there, the restaurant couldn't make so much money. But now Su Qingtan was a high-ranking official of the Supreme Judiciary. What he said was also reasonable. He couldn't stop Su Li from going to the National Academy for the sake of money. That reason was not tenable at all and would definitely be vetoed by Su Qingtan in the end. In this case, it was better to try to win Su Li's favor. Thinking of this, Su Huanli nodded and said with a smile, of course. Studies are more important. Li, don't go to the Baiwei building tomorrow. Su Li nodded obediently and smiled sweetly, okay. Thank you, father. Su Qingtan was also gratified. His father finally understood his second sister. If he was still like his aunt and grandma, he would not be as helpless as he used to be in the Desu town and could only watch helplessly. The three of them went back to their courtyards to rest. When Su Li returned to her own courtyard, Mammy Li had already prepared bathwater and supper. After Su Li took a bath and changed her clothes, it was past midnight after supper. But she found that the light in Su Qingtan's room was still on. She thought for a moment and walked to the door with the lamp. Then she pushed the door and went in. Su Qingtan was reading a case file carefully. When he heard the sound, he looked up and saw Su Li. He couldn't help but smile. Second sister, why are you here? I had supper and saw that the light in your room was still on. I was worried, so I came to have a look. Su Li said and walked to Su Qingtan. What are you doing? It's late. You'd better have an early rest. Su Qingtan felt warm in his heart. He bowed his head and smiled, I see. I'll go to bed after reading this file. I'll accompany you. I haven't read with you for a long time. What are these? Su Li picked up the file and glanced at the words The Massacre of the Yi Family. She couldn't help but stare. These are the unsettled case files of the Supreme Judiciary. Su Qingtan smiled. He took the scroll from Su Li's hand and unfolded it. Then he put it back in Su Li's hand. These are confidential. Only the officers of the Supreme Judiciary can read them. But it's rare for second sister to read with me. I'll let you have a look. Thank you, eldest brother. Su Li thanked him and stood behind Su Qingtan to read quietly. The file she took happened to be the first volume, which briefly introduced the Yi family. 13 years ago, the Yi family was also a rich and powerful family in Yunjing City. The head of the family, General Yi, was the deputy general of General Ling Feiqing at that time. The family was prosperous. However, no one knew what enemies they provoked. On the 15th of August, the whole family was exterminated overnight. None of the 105 people of the Yi family survived. Even the babies in swaddling clothes were crushed to death. It's almost the 15th of August. The unsettled case of the Yi family, which lasted for 13 years, became 14 years, but there is still no clue. I really don't know why Ling Qinglan is so persistent. Su Qingtan sighed. There were thousands of unsettled cases in the Supreme Judiciary. However, Brother Ling didn't investigate other cases. Instead, he had to investigate a case which happened so long ago. Wasn't he asking for a snub? Su Li heard it and said with a smile, maybe Lord Ling is related to this family. Only a case related to himself will make him so persistent. Su Qingtan couldn't help but shake his head and laugh. The people of the Yi family have died long ago. Ling Qinglan is the posthumous son of General Ling Feihe. How could he be related to the Yi family? I heard from the people of the Supreme Judiciary that he was humiliated because of this case. He didn't deserve the title of the first person in the Supreme Judiciary. So, he worked hard. But in my opinion, Brother Ling shouldn't be so naive. I see. Su Li responded. Her eyes were shining. She seemed to think of something. At this moment, in the Ling mansion, Ling Qinglan rarely came here. Both Mrs. Jiyu and Qiu Meng were very happy. They quickly ordered people to prepare wine and dishes. Qinglan, you haven't come here for a long time. Mrs. Jiyu picked a whole bowl of dishes for Ling Qinglan and blamed him. Why do you live outside? Your parents died early. Why don't you live here? Your brother Ping is not at home all the year round. Ling Li is a little bastard. I need someone to show filial piety to me. Ling Qinglan's face rippled with a touch of warmth. He said with a smile, Grandma, I am used to living in the Supreme Judiciary. I miss you, so I come to see you. Sometimes you are more cunning than your brother Li. I just don't know. Chapter 153. It was very late at night. Mrs. Jiyu and Qiu Meng went to bed one after another without eating much. Ling Qinglan temporarily rested in the Ling mansion tonight. When the servants went to bed, he immediately got up and came to Ling Li's courtyard. At this moment, the light was still on in the study of Ling Li's courtyard. Looking at the yellow light, Ling Qinglan smiled and pushed the door in. What a rare guest, Ling Qinglan. More than half a year has passed. You finally remember that you are a member of the Enmore cult. Ling Li reclined on the wheelchair and said with a faint smile. Ling Qinglan's expression remained unchanged. He sat opposite Ling Li at the table and said seriously, although I didn't come, the news of the Tianya house has never stopped. I never forget my duty. Ling Xian came in at this time and poured a cup of hot tea for Ling Qinglan. Warm yourself up. It's late at night. I am your nominal cousin anyway. I should care about you. Ling Li waved his hand. Ling Qinglan couldn't help but smile and said, you are still the same. No matter what is going on outside, you look indifferent. Then he picked up the tea and put it to his mouth. Ling Li said untimely, you are still the same. You don't say anything when there is something wrong with the cold poison. You also let Su Qingtan take over the pending case of the Yi family. Do you really think that you can hide the news from me because you are the owner of the Tianya house? Ling Qinglan stopped and was silent for a moment. Finally, he took a sip of tea and raised his head to say seriously, I don't escape. I just accept the fact calmly. I also want to find the enemy who destroyed the Yi family by myself. However, God doesn't open his eyes. I can only entrust it to others. Su Qingtan is very smart. Although he can't take over the position of Qinghu, he can continue to help me investigate cases in the Supreme Judiciary. Ling Li sighed softly and said, if you said so 1 year ago, I would definitely agree with you. I would definitely agree with your method, but now, no. You have to help me get the full moon sword. How can you leave it alone? During this time, even if you want to vomit blood, you have to think of a perfect strategy to get the full moon sword from the wolves and leopard. Ling Li threw a note to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan took it and opened it. A strangely shaped branch was drawn on it, and the word Ku Rong was attached next to it. Activate all the power of the Tianya house and find this branch at all costs. Then, your task will be completed. After hearing that, Ling Qinglan was expressionless. After a long time, he stood up and nodded slightly. I know. You saved me once. I will help you fulfill these 2 requirements. Ling Li smiled evilly and stared at Ling Qinglan, who was calm. He suddenly asked, Yi Mo, what am I to you? Ling Qinglan's eyes changed, and he finally became serious. He hadn't heard of this name for 13 years. Sure enough, after a long time, everything would become unfamiliar. For Ling Li, he was disdainful and disgusted at first. Then, when he found out about his true identity, he was astonished and in awe. After Ling Li found a way to help him break through the inborn hurdle and save his life, he was grateful. Finally, when he learned that he still couldn't escape the fate, he became indifferent. Who was Ling Li to him? He really didn't think about it. The study became quieter and quieter. It seemed that Ling Li's question was difficult to answer. Ling Qinglan was silent for a long time and finally couldn't give an answer. "Give me time, and I will give you the answer." After saying that, Ling Qinglan left without looking back. Ling Xian couldn't bear it and whispered, "Master, don't you tell him?" "If." Ling Li held his chin with one hand and smiled, "If I can't even trust this guy, I can't be the hierarch of the Enmore cult." The next day, Su Li went out early in the morning, but she didn't go to the National Academy. The people arranged by Ling Li to protect her secretly followed her, and suddenly found that they were lost. "What's the matter?" A young man dressed as a peddler was confused. He didn't see an ordinary woman in coarse linen pass by him. The people of Sholu cult practiced the same practice method. Su Li could see at a glance that the people who had been protecting her secretly were from Sholu cult, so she didn't drive them away. If they were others, she would have killed them. Today, she didn't go to the National Academy. Yesterday, when she read in Su Qingtan's study, she suddenly realized that the plan to be implemented later had to be carried out in advance. The forces in Yunjing City were complicated. The structure was not as simple as that in the Qinghe town. She could know the general situation after a little exploration. In Yunjing City, if there were no spies and spies, she would be like a blind person and couldn't grasp the situation at all. Just like now, she had no way to know how many people of the Lianxia cult, the Hehuan sect and other forces entered the city. So, she went to the Hongyang house today. Passing by a clothes shop, Su Li had become a handsome child and walked to the lane of brothels. There were few rich childs who came to drink in the lane of brothels during the day. It was even rarer to see a good-looking child like Su Li. As soon as she appeared, many prostitutes waved their handkerchiefs at the window. "Master, come and play Tilda child, I am very powerful. I promise that you will be comfortable." Master Tilda. Su Li smiled, but she never looked at those prostitutes. She went straight to the Hongyang house with the best position. Those prostitutes stamped their feet when they saw her. She went to see Chu Fox again. "These men are really good." As soon as Su Li entered the Hongyang house, the procuress, whose face was painted red and white, greeted him with a smile. She said, "Child, you look strange. I am afraid that it is the first time for you to come to our Hongyang house. Do you want me to introduce you to the girls in the Hongyang house?" Su Li retreated a few steps without leaving a trace and said with a warm smile, "I heard that Miss Chu Lu of your Hongyang house is excellent at playing the zither. I came here because of your reputation. Mom, I hope you can arrange it for me." When the procuress heard that, her eyes lit up. She gently patted Su Li's shoulder and winked at her. "Oh, she is the most popular girl in our Hongyang house. The price?" Su Li still smiled and said, "Mom, just tell me." Hearing that, the procuress immediately went upstairs and shouted, "Lu, welcome the guest. A child wants to listen to your zither. He is a rare elegant guest." "Got it, Mom. I will prepare now. Please wait for a moment." A soft voice came from upstairs. It was so soft that it could melt one's bones. Many playboys who were drinking in the Hongyang house during the day couldn't help but feel excited. Su Li was full of jealousy and hatred. Chu Lu, the bitch, not only cared about money but also appearance. She was really picky. Someone like him, who was poor and ugly, had no chance at all. Su Li showed good self-restraint. She sat downstairs and didn't look at other prostitutes. After a while, a good-looking maid came downstairs and invited Su Li to go upstairs. Su Li thanked her and went upstairs. The little maid's eyes were full of stars. She wished she could be a miss to serve this child. Su Li went to the door and gently knocked on the door. A fresh and elegant voice came from the door, which was completely different from the soft voice before. "Child, you are really elegant. I, Chu Lu, should play a song for you. Please come in." Su Li smiled and opened the door. A faint fragrance came into her nose. What she saw was a very elegantly decorated room. It seemed that the person living here was a scholar, not a prostitute. The maid quietly closed the door. Su Li walked inside and finally saw Chu Lu sitting in front of the zither. When Chu Lu saw Su Li's handsome face, she couldn't help but be surprised. She loosened her hands from the strings and said, "It's hard to believe that such an elegant and extraordinary person like you is willing to come to the brothel to play a song for Chu Lu." Su Li sat down with the help of the table and faced Chu Lu. She chuckled and said, "It's hard for me to believe that such a beautiful girl like Chu Lu would give herself up here." Hearing that, Chu Lu's beautiful face was full of sadness. She said, "I'm a good girl, but I was raped by villains. That's my fate. I fought back, but I couldn't defeat them." After hearing that, Su Li smiled more and stroked the invisible air with her right hand. It seemed that she was intoxicated with something. Chu Lu was confused. But Su Li suddenly said, "The heart-melting powder of the Hehuan sect is really powerful. Even I almost let down my vigilance and tell you my origin." As soon as Su Li said that, Chu Lu's face suddenly changed. She looked fierce and didn't have the sadness of a weak girl. She stroked the surface of the zither with one hand and stared at Su Li's face coldly. She said, "Who are you?" Clang, clang, clang. Su Li gently clapped her hands. The strings in Chu Lu's hands were broken and couldn't make any sound. Her weapon was destroyed. Her face was completely pale. The person who came was extremely powerful. She couldn't defeat her at all. Chu Lu of the Hehuan sect. You are in charge of the intelligence agency in Yunjing City. The Hongyang house is actually under your control. Am I right? Su Li narrowed her eyes and said faintly. Chu Lu seemed to give up resistance. She sighed and said, "Since you are prepared, why do you ask?" When they were talking, the fragrance in the room was much stronger. Chu Lu stared at the change of Su Li. But she saw that Su Li looked as usual and was not affected at all. How was it possible? Chu Lu was really panicked this time. When did the knockout drug given by the Hehuan sect become so useless? Since I am prepared, how can I not guard against the famous hallucination powder of the Hehuan sect? Su Li stood up and walked to Chu Lu. She said with a smile, "You have been in Yunjing for several years. Why are you still so immature?" Chu Lu took a deep breath and calmed down reluctantly. She said, "Since you are not in a hurry to kill me, you must have something important to discuss with me. Why do you hide it? Just say it." "Miss Chu, you are so bold." Su Li praised and sat down again. She said, "I also know that you joined the Hehuan sect because you had no choice. You were even forced to come to Yunjing City by the sect. The Hongyang powder in your body is warning you all the time that your life is not in your hands, right?" Chu Lu looked dull and said, "It turns out that you are a disciple of the same sect. In this case, why do you test me? I have already accepted my fate." What she said to deceive Su Li just now was false, but the latter half was true. She was still no match for the giant Hehuan sect after all. "No, when did I say that I am the dregs of the Hehuan sect?" Su Li looked disgusted and said, "Miss Chu, don't compare me with those sluts. It is disgusting. Not from the Hehuan sect." Chu Lu's dull expression changed a little, and then she was deeply shocked. Su Li was not from the Hehuan sect, but she knew so many secrets of the Hehuan sect. Every sect has moles from other forces. "Miss Chu, you don't need to be surprised." Seeing that she had completely shocked Chu Lu, Su Li finally stopped teasing and said seriously, "I don't know if Miss Chu is interested in making a deal with me." Chu Lu's heart shrank. She knew that it was the main topic. "What deal?" Su Li showed a finger and smiled brightly. She said, "The first one is that I can borrow your intelligence agency in Yunjing City. Correspondingly, I will give you the antidote of the Hongyang powder so that you will no longer be controlled by the Hehuan sect." "What about the second one?" Chu Lu was a little excited, but she didn't agree. Chapter 154. You flatter me, young master. I just have some self-awareness. Chu Lu smiled lightly. Even if she used the arrangement of the Hehuan sect in Yunjing City to exchange the antidote of the Hongchen powder from Su Li, How could she escape from the Hehuan sect with the cultivation of the acquired hurdle? If she really agreed, she would definitely die. The second way of cooperation is that you, Chu Lu, become my woman. Su Li saw Chu Lu's expression changed slightly. She couldn't help but smile and said, Miss Chu, don't get me wrong. I don't have any improper thoughts about you. I want to say that if you are willing to betray the Hehuan sect and join the force I belong to, as long as you do your part, I will definitely let you escape unscathed. Escape unscathed? Chu Lu's eyes flashed with sarcasm. How? And how do I know that I just got out of the wolf's den and into the tiger's mouth? Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and said, Would you rather be shackled by the Hongchen powder all your life and let others control your life than try my proposal? Chu Lu's delicate body shook slightly. She struggled and said with difficulty, Who would like to be a puppet that can't be free in life and death? But you come here strangely. If you don't tell me the reason, I'm afraid that I can't be moved. Su Li sat cross-legged in front of Chu Lu and said calmly, In terms of force, the Hehuan sect, which is a 9th grade sect, is not as powerful as the Hehuan sect. But in terms of the skills of hiding people, the Hehuan sect is not as good as me. Just like this. While speaking, Su Li's appearance changed into another ordinary face at a speed visible to the naked eye. If she hadn't changed her clothes, Chu Lu wouldn't have known that they were the same person. You! Chu Lu was shocked. This was a high-level disguise method. If she could master a little bit of it, she could completely change her identity after the Hongchen powder was cured. Even if she stayed in Yunjing City, the people of the Hehuan sect couldn't find her. For a moment, Chu Lu was tempted. Not everyone can learn a high-grade disguise technique to a profound level. I'm sure you're clear about this, miss. However, I still have a secret method that is easier to practice. As long as miss shows enough value, I will personally return with the disguise method and the antidote for the Hongchen powder. What do you think? Speaking of this, Chu Lu's eyes were fixed and she had made a decision. What do I need to do? Hearing that, Su Li finally smiled happily. An hour later, Su Li waved a folding fan and left the Hongyang house leisurely. Chu Lu, who was on the 2nd floor, opened the window and watched Su Li go away. Her eyes were full of complex feelings. She knew very well that after today, she would dance on the edge of a knife. If she was careless, she would be cut into pieces. Walking out of the alley of brothels, Su Li took a deep breath and felt quite relaxed. With Chu Lu as the supervisor, it was much easier for the Leanly building to develop. Seeing that it was still early, Su Li took a fancy to a clothing store. When she was about to go there, she suddenly heard an old voice coming from the street behind her. Divination. Point out the right path. Those who are fated will not take a single cent. Child, you are fated to be mine. Why don't you come and have a divination? Su Li's expression changed slightly. Following the voice, she saw a ragged beggar sitting on the ground with his legs crossed. There was a broken bowl in front of him. There were not many copper coins in it. If there was not a piece of cloth next to the broken bowl that said divination, she would have thought it was a beggar. Seeing Su Li coming and going, the beggar's eyes suddenly brightened. He immediately continued to say, If the divination doesn't work, it's free. I am proficient in yin and yang and the 5 elements. People call me the 10 divinations and 9 spirits. It's not an exaggeration. Su Li shook her head slightly and turned around to leave. For a moment, she felt that the old beggar was a superior. Seeing this, the old beggar was immediately anxious. He immediately used his black chicken claws to calculate in a dignified manner and murmured. Listening carefully, it turned out that he was saying, Heaven and earth, I am the best at fortune-telling in the human world. Maybe it was God's blessing. After the old beggar calculated for less than 3 breaths, it seemed that he really calculated something. His eyes brightened and he shouted, Child, please wait. What I said is true. Your fate is strange. It seems that you have experienced 2 lives. It's extremely strange. Crack. When the second half of the sentence was said, Su Li's indifferent face instantly became stiff and she stopped. A random old beggar on the street could tell that she was a reincarnated body. Being shocked, Su Li slowly turned around. Her dignified expression disappeared in the blink of an eye and turned into strong interest. She turned around and came to the old beggar. She handed out a note of 100 taels of silver and said with a smile, 2 lives? I have never heard of such a saying. You are a bit interesting as a fortune teller. I happen to have some time today. You can help me to have a divination. When the passers-by saw this scene, they couldn't help but shake their heads. The old beggar was a famous liar in Yunjing City. None of what he said was true. Unexpectedly, someone was fooled. When the old beggar saw the banknote of 100 taels of silver, his 2 turbid eyes immediately burst out a strong light. Su Li didn't see clearly how his 2 claws moved, and the banknote in her hand was stuffed into his arms. The old beggar loved money so much, Su Li felt strange. For a moment, she wondered if the old beggar guessed it. But what he said before was not like a wild guess. The old beggar rubbed his hands and asked Su Li to spread out her palm. He took out 3 dirty copper coins from his arms and put them on her palm. Then he put his palms together and muttered some nonsense that Su Li couldn't understand. Then he devoutly took the copper coins from Su Li's hand one by one. Su Li didn't know whether it was an illusion or not. She seemed to feel that the color of the 3 copper coins seemed to be a little darker. The old beggar took the copper coins and threw them into the sky. At the same time, he shouted softly. This time, Su Li finally heard what he said. Reincarnation of heaven and earth, the seal appears. Ding, ding, ding. The 3 copper coins seemed to be pulled by an invisible force. They fell to the ground at a very fast speed and made a tinkling sound. Su Li's eyes changed and stared at the old beggar. This person really had some real skills. When the copper coins fell, the old beggar stretched his head to look. His face changed greatly and he spat out a big mouthful of blood. Su Li's heart shrank. She thought that the old beggar would say something amazing again. But the old beggar said bitterly, "What a loss. My blood is more than 100 taels." Su Li narrowed her eyes and stood up to leave. Seeing that the situation was not good, the old beggar got up and grabbed Su Li's ankle. He said repeatedly, "Hey, child, child. I'm just kidding. I'll explain it for you." Su Li stopped and sat down again. The old beggar shook his head and lamented, "People's hearts are not what they used to be. Nowadays, it's really more and more difficult to do business. Child, your sign is clearly the evil of the evil and the evil of the evil. Since ancient times, evil has never prevailed over good. Those who have this sign are bound to have bad luck and a miserable end. But child is not so," the old beggar said with doubts on his face. He pointed to a very inconspicuous broken character on the copper coins. "You should have a doomed test 1.5 years ago. You will definitely die. But now you are standing in front of me alive, which is really puzzling. As the saying goes, one who survives a great disaster is bound to have good fortune later. Maybe because of the doomed test, child's birth destiny has changed and there is a trace of vitality in the vast deathly air." Su Li was silent all the time. 1.5 years ago, it was the day when she was reborn. The doomed test mostly referred to the death of the previous life. The old beggar's divination was so accurate that it scared her. "Speaking of it, this is the second time that I have met a person with this divination." The old beggar seemed to recall an unpleasant memory. He gnashed his teeth and said, "That is the first playboy in Yunjing. I just said a few words, and I was almost killed by him. It's really hateful." Su Li's eyes flashed when she heard that. Ling Li. His origin was indeed somewhat unclear, and most of the things he taught her were not from the Dahan country. However, even if she went to the spiritual circle, which was a higher level in the previous life, she did not see anything related to Ling Li. Ling Li's hometown was more distant than the spiritual circle. Thinking of this, Su Li smiled and asked, "Old master, I really don't believe your alarmist talk. However, if it is really as you said, how can we solve the problem?" The old beggar coughed slightly and twisted his hands. His meaning was self-evident. Su Li stood up slowly. The old beggar panicked again and immediately explained, "Divination is divination, and interpretation of the lots is interpretation. This is the rule. Even if young master is fated to meet me, you should at least give me some compensation, shouldn't you?" Su Li was silent for a moment. Finally, she squatted down and took out a banknote. This time, it was 1,000 taels. The old beggar's eyes were even brighter. He grabbed the banknote and murmured, "You are much more generous than Ling Li." Su Li was stunned. Didn't he just say that Ling Li didn't believe it? How could he let him interpret the lots? It seemed that the old guy hid something. After the old beggar took the money, he picked up the black copper coin and scraped off the dirt on it with his fingertips. Then he poured it into the inkstone he took out from his arms and ground it to melt completely. Then he took out a writing brush from nowhere and dipped it in the ink. He said to Su Li, "Stretch out your hand. This is my treasure. I didn't even take it out to draw runes for the little bastard of the Ling family." The implication was that he did it for the sake of the silver. Su Li hesitated for a moment, and finally reached out her hand, showing her white wrist. The old beggar couldn't help but murmur, "Your wrist is more tender than that of a silly girl." Su Li's face darkened. Before she spoke, she saw the old beggar holding the writing brush and drawing a circle on Su Li's wrist unskillfully. It was extremely ugly and didn't look like a rune at all. The old beggar didn't seem to be satisfied. He muttered to a circle of extremely ugly ink marks for a moment. Then he drew another circle, which merged with the previous black circle and became darker and thicker. Did the old guy deliberately make fun of him? Chapter 155. Whoosh. A stinging pain suddenly rose from her wrist. In Su Li's horrified eyes, the black circle drawn by the old beggar suddenly emitted bursts of white smoke. The black gradually faded, and the white smoke condensed into a strange pattern. It trembled like a living thing, and finally drilled into Su Li's skin through her pores. Su Li only felt that there seemed to be something on her wrist, but this feeling only lasted for a moment and then disappeared. No matter how she probed, she couldn't detect it. After such a change, the black ink on her wrist disappeared out of thin air, as if it had never appeared. "What did you do to me?" Su Li looked at the pedestrians on the street coldly, but she saw that they passed by and didn't look at her. It seemed that the world where she and the old beggar lived was completely separated. She shook her wrist, and the dagger immediately fell into her hand. The tip of the dagger immediately glowed with moon-white light. Seeing this, the old beggar showed an aggrieved expression. "Child, you are so unreasonable. I spent my cultivation to draw a rune for you. But you not only don't shed tears of gratitude, but also fight against me." This really bitterly disappointed this old man's heart. Whoosh. There was a sound of breaking through the air. Before the old beggar finished his words, Su Li's dagger had been put against his neck, and her voice gradually became cold. "I have never seen such a weird rune. Since you have deceived me into being cursed by this rune, why not tell me the truth and tell me the function of the rune?" The old beggar squinted his turbid eyes and glanced at the glittering dagger. He sighed sadly. "People are really unscrupulous. I don't know you, so how can I hurt you? Although the rune I drew for you can't completely avoid bad luck, it can bring you a glimmer of hope. You put the dagger against my neck. Tut-tut." Su Li's expression was slightly relaxed, and she put down the dagger, not because what he said was reasonable, but because she had been cursed by the rune. Even if she killed the old beggar, it would not help. If the rune was really harmful to her, the old beggar should have shown off long ago. She didn't have the ability to isolate the world. This person's cultivation was far higher than hers, but she didn't know why he didn't show it. "I hope you're telling the truth. Otherwise, I won't let go of anyone who harbors ill intentions towards me," Su Li said in a deep voice. The old beggar waved his hand indifferently. Go away, go away. It's not easy for me to tell someone's fortune, but it's full of ungrateful people. Sure enough, the world is fake, and people can't be counted." Su Li frowned. The old beggar said something she didn't understand. She didn't want to ask again, so she turned and left. She had just taken 3 steps when she suddenly felt something strange behind her. She quickly looked back, and her pupils instantly shrank. The old beggar was not on the ground, and even the stall was gone. And she thought, "Su. Or, is he still here, but I can't see him?" Thinking of this, Su Li's eyes were full of fear. She subconsciously went away. She didn't want to have anything to do with this person. She would forget what happened today because she was confused for a moment. And of Su of Li of, and of the, and of. Of today is a good day, hey. Seeing Su Li leave, the old beggar packed up his bedding and left. He held the banknotes tightly in his hand, and a touch of sarcasm flashed through his turbid eyes. He said, "It's not smooth to use a fake thing." At this moment, in the branch of the Linli building in Yunjing City, Chu Qingning obediently sat in the temporary shed and innocently looked at Fang Yuan and Yin Shuotong next to the table. He looked as if he had constipation and was very embarrassed. "What's going on? If you don't say anything, I'm going to ignore you." Yin Shuotong was slightly annoyed, and her eyes were full of killing intent. Did the fool find another woman in Yunjing City? "Qingning, if you don't tell us, we can't help you either." Fang Yuan frowned and said strangely, "You suddenly stop building the underground adytum. Aren't you afraid that Su Li will blame you?" Since it was convenient for the poisonous heart-biting insect to dig the mountain, the construction of the underground adytum of the Linli building in Yunjing City was naturally handed over to Chu Qingning. Hearing Fang Yuan's words, Chu Qingning's face became paler. He rubbed his hands and showed a smile that was uglier than crying. "Su Li told us to be careful and not to be discovered by the neighbor. Well, I seem to, accidentally, dig through." Yin Shuotong was stunned at first, and then she opened her almond-shaped eyes widely and said, "What did you say?" But Fang Yuan had already rushed to the underground passage. At night, Su Li received the urgent news and rushed to the end of the underground passage. She saw a wall made of black iron suddenly appear in the land. The iron wall should be as smooth as a mirror, but now it was full of potholes as if it had been bitten by a dog. One of the potholes was particularly deep, and it was almost penetrated by a thin film. Through the thin film, Fang Yuan and others could almost feel the light from the other side of the iron wall. Su Li raised her eyebrows and glanced at Chu Qingning, who stood aside like a little wife and didn't speak. She didn't say anything and waved her hand to let everyone return to the temporary shed. "That is to say, you were sleeping at that time, and the poisonous heart-biting insect operated on its own. The iron wall suddenly appeared, and it ate it directly as if it were mud and stones. You didn't realize it until it sent a message of indigestion and woke you up." Su Li briefly summarized. Chu Qingning smiled embarrassedly and hid behind Yin Shuotong without a trace. Then he nodded gently. Su Li didn't say anything, but Yin Shuotong was the first to laugh out of anger. "Wow. Chu Qingning, you should sleep late behind our back. Do you know that if this wall is dug through, we are likely to face the anger of 2 inborn seniors?" Chu Qingning shook his body and was full of guilt. He was about to cry. I didn't mean it. If you meant it, you would have been dead." Su Li said lightly, which scared Chu Qingning instantly. He lowered his head and said dejectedly, "I am willing to accept any punishment." Since Su Li said that the winery next door had an extraordinary origin, we should have thought that they would also build an adytum underground. Yin Shuotong said with some annoyance. She regretted that she didn't remind Chu Qingning in time. They are really rich and overbearing to build a wall with black iron. In the outside world, weapons cast with black iron are hard currency and extremely valuable. Su Li shook her head and explained, "There is another function of black iron. As long as it reaches a certain thickness, it can isolate the psychic awareness of the inborn warriors. Now the wall is useless because of Chu Qingning's torment." Fang Yuan's eyes were slightly fixed. "Does it mean that you can see what is in that adytum?" Su Li glanced at Fang Yuan and said, "The cultivation of those two is much higher than mine. If I really explore it with my psychic awareness, they will come to us for tea in the next moment." Fang Yuan was scared after hearing that, and a cold sweat appeared on his forehead instantly. He was about to break through to the inborn realm. He originally wanted to explore it after the breakthrough, but fortunately, Su Li had reminded him earlier. Noticing that Fang Yuan's pneuma was unstable, Su Li was surprised and said, "The movement of breaking through to the inborn realm is too big. Remember to find a desolate place outside the city and let Qingning and Shuotong protect you." Being exposed by Su Li, Fang Yuan's face was slightly red and he felt a little lost. He originally wanted to give her a surprise. Su Li smiled and handed over the AO sword skills. In fact, She didn't have much hope. Unexpectedly, Fang Yuan had a good talent and was about to break through to the inborn realm before the age of 18. It was really a surprise. After laughing, Su Li looked at Chu Qingning and said in a faint tone, "I will fill the iron wall with something. You don't have to worry about it. Chu Qingning, you will not sleep for 3 days and 3 nights to complete the construction of the underground adytum. If there is any mistake, I have a good job. I am worried that no one will do it." Chu Qingning trembled when he heard that. He immediately promised that he would not make any mistake even if he didn't sleep for 7 days and 7 nights. Fang Yuan's heart sank when he heard that. What good job! Chu Qingning didn't do it. It seemed that Su Li didn't want them to do it. Was she going to do it herself? Su Li heard that and smiled gently. She told them to speed up the construction of the Linli building. Then she left in the night. There was a so-called good job. But now Chu Lu was here. Of course, she had to make the best use of her. It was more suitable to let the people in the business do the troublesome work. In the Hongyang house, Chu Lu received the first order from Su Li. She felt strange and said, "How can I follow her? If I follow Su Li, it is reasonable. But Su Zipei, who is she?" In the next few days, an extremely strange scene appeared in a remote winery alley in Yunjing City. There were only 3 to 5 small taverns and inns on this street, but there were 2 shops that were right next to each other. One of them was in a dilapidated state, and its business was bleak, while the other was still busy building a 2-story building. The materials used were all of the best quality, and just looking at the wood alone, it was worth at least 100,000 taels of silver. Is there something wrong with the owner's head? Our business is so bad. Why does he still build a shop here? A woman dressed in a rural dress walked out of the kitchen with a kitchen knife. She looked at the tall building which was several times higher than their winery and couldn't help shouting. Not long after, a middle-aged scholar walked out of the front room. He was dressed in a grey robe and had an unkempt beard. He looked like a down-and-out scholar who had failed in his examinations. His skinny figure was in stark contrast to the woman's stocky build. The shabby scholar glanced at the tall building. He cursed with jealousy, "What a waste of money. It is better to spend the money." When the strong woman heard that, she immediately walked over and grabbed the shabby scholar's ear. She opened her mouth and shouted, "Who are you scolding? Who are you scolding? Do you dislike me for giving too little pocket money? Or do you miss Yang Yang of the Qinghong house? Well, you bastard. You learned to scold the locust indirectly after only a few years of study? It hurts. My wife, I really didn't think about it. Let go, RRR. My ear is going to fall off." Chapter 156. Chu Qingning heard the scolding coming from next door and couldn't help but dig his ears. If he didn't see this black iron wall, he would not believe that the extremely vulgar couple would be superior inborn seniors. Is this the so-called great seclusion in the world? I admit my inferiority. Chu Qingning sighed. He closed his eyes and continued to control the poisonous heart-biting insect to dig the earth. His pious expression was no less than that of the excavators from Lanxiang. Su Li meditated for a few days and finally finished studying the remaining pages of the secret medicine of the Hehuan sect. When she reached such a realm in the poison circle, the so-called secret medicine of the sect was just a lock with a cloud of suspicion. Now she had both the key and the lock, so she could see through it at a glance. It wouldn't take too long to develop the antidote of the Hongchen powder. As for the poison in Tang Lei's body, it would not take effect for a while, and it was not the time to detoxify it. The development of the antidote was not urgent. On this day, in the Su house, Su Li got up early in the morning and hadn't gone out yet. Suddenly, Mammy Li appeared at the door with 2 red invitations, trembling with fear. "Miss, something bad has happened." Su Li raised her eyebrows and sat down again. She gave up the idea of going to the affiliated school and took the 2 invitations to open. The first one was from the first prince's residence. The second photo was of the third prince's residence. "I have long heard that Miss Su is beautiful and talented. I have admired you for a long time, so I specially set up a banquet in the Hongyang house. Miss Su, Please do me a favor and come to meet me at the Shu hour of the first day of the 8th lunar month. I will definitely prepare for you." Putting the invitation on the table, Su Li thought for a while. These two invitations, except for the location, seemed to be carved from the same mold. If she really wanted to attend the banquet, she could only choose one of them. The emperor was already old, but the position of crown prince had not yet been established, so the inheritance war was inevitable. The first prince and the third prince were obviously against each other. Both sides were sparing no effort to win over their forces. Standing behind her was the emperor's preceptor Qi Xianqing, who could speak in front of the emperor. Naturally, she was regarded as a delicious cake to win over. "Miss, this is the first prince and the third prince. If we make them unhappy..." Mammy Li was frightened and worried about Su Li. This step was too difficult. No matter who she chose, she would offend someone. But if she chose neither, she would offend both sides. "Nanny, don't worry. I know what I'm doing." Su Li smiled slightly. She was not surprised that she was suddenly in trouble. In the previous life, she heard later that the two princes also competed with each other, but neither of them became the emperor, which was quite ridiculous. Putting down the invitation, Su Li went out as usual and didn't mean to reply to any prince. Mammy Li was full of doubts. She waited anxiously for a day, but no one from the prince's mansion came to question her. It seemed that no one was convinced and they were sure that Su Li would go there on the first day of August. The hostility between the two princes' residences became more and more obvious. In this strange atmosphere, the first day of August finally arrived. Su Li was dressed in a feather blue embroidered brocade dress. A jasper hairpin was inserted into her black hair bun. Her delicate face was slightly powdered and she was about to go out. Su Qingtan knocked at the door and came in. When he saw the second sister's dress, his eyes flashed with amazement, but instantly became worried. He asked in a deep voice, "You really don't want me to go with you to the banquet tonight?" He understood that Su Li was invited because of Qi Xianqing. If she refused the prince, it was hard to imagine whether the anger of the former would directly swallow Su Li. He remembered that he was fortunate to have Qi Xianqing as a banner to block countless playboys for Su Li before. He didn't expect that she would be involved in the dangerous battle for the throne. It was really Qi Xianqing's fault and success. Su Li came with a peaceful smile and gently straightened Su Qingtan's slightly uneven clothes. Her gentle voice had a convincing power. "Eldest brother, don't worry. I will have a good sense of propriety. Besides, the decision is not up to me, but up to the master. I believe that as long as I say so, the princes will not embarrass me." Su Qingtan felt a little better. He forced a smile and said, "I hope so. Then I'm leaving. Be careful on the way." Seeing Su Li's carriage leave, Su Qingtan's face was tense. He clenched his fists hidden in his sleeves. He was still too weak. If he had enough power and strength, why did he force his second sister, a 16-year-old girl, to face the oppression of the princes? You can't protect your sister with your current identity. When you think clearly one day, you will understand what I mean. I expect you to take the initiative to come to me instead of passively accepting it. Thinking of Ling Qinglan's words, Su Qingtan gritted his teeth. At this moment, his eyes were extremely firm. In the alley of brothels, the river behind the Hongyang house was sparkling. A well-lit exquisite ship with several decks was floating on the river. A long wooden board was set up at the bridgehead and extended to the shore. Under the new moon, the breeze was blowing. It was elegant and chic. "Lady Chu, I really owe you a favor today." The first prince, Dongfang Shang, came early. He booked the entire Hongyang house tonight. But he thought it was inappropriate to entertain a girl in the Hongyang house. Chu Lu came up with the idea of boating on the river and solved the problem for him. Chu Lu covered her face and smiled coquettishly. She said, "Your Highness, you are so polite. It is my duty to share your worries and difficulties. Please don't forget the help of the Hehuan sect after you ascend the throne." Dongfang Sheng's mouth was dry and his throat rolled. He secretly cursed that the women of Hehuan sect were really vixens, but he still maintained the image of a gentleman and nodded with a smile. "Of course, it is. It's almost time. Miss Chu, please sit down." Then, He pointed to the gauze curtain at the stern. There was a guqin behind the gauze curtain. He would feel much better if there was a gauze curtain. Chu Lu was surprised. The first prince could resist the temptation of the Hehuan powder. She underestimated him. With his patience, he might be able to do it. The task assigned by the sect was completed. Chu Lu quietly dispersed the Hehuan powder. She got up and walked into the gauze curtain. Dongfang Sheng felt much better. He was a little relieved and waited carefully. He didn't know much about the martial arts circle, so he didn't notice the difference just now. In a twinkling of an eye, it was 11 o'clock. No one appeared on the riverbank. Even if Dongfang Sheng had some confidence in the chips in his hand, if Su Li didn't come today, how could he perform? For a moment, Dongfang Sheng felt slightly agitated. He couldn't help but loosen the button on his chest and take a breath. But at this moment, on the riverbank full of lanterns, two figures, one in blue and one in white, suddenly appeared. The blue figure was Su Li. Dongfang Sheng was shocked. But when he saw the face of the white figure beside Su Li, his eyes immediately widened. Why? Why did this guy appear here? Ling Li pushed the wheelchair by himself and quickly entered the ship. His speed was even faster than Su Li's. Seeing Dongfang Sheng's dull face, he immediately laughed. He patted Dongfang Sheng's stiff shoulder very warmly and said with a crooked face, "I haven't seen you for a long time. Brother Sheng, you are still elegant as before. As soon as I received your invitation, I immediately dressed up and rushed over without stopping. How about it? My clothes aren't a disgrace to you, right?" Looking at Ling Li's extremely attentive face, Dongfang Sheng's face instantly became darker than the bottom of a pot. He didn't believe that the little bastard who dared to put aphrodisiac in his wine a year ago suddenly became sensible today. He looked down and saw Ling Li's wrinkled clothes. His mouth twitched violently. The little bastard wore the same clothes as him. Looking at Ling Li's wrinkled clothes, the first prince, who was very satisfied with his clothes, suddenly had a feeling of vomiting. This guy really came to undermine him, but he could only bite the bullet today, because he did give the invitation to the Ling family. At this moment, Su Li had already walked to the ship. Looking at Ling Li, who was complacent, and the first prince, who was angry, she couldn't help but feel strange. Why did he also come back? Seeing Su Li coming in, the first prince was confused. Dongfang Sheng instantly felt that his face was ruthlessly pulled off by Ling Li and rubbed on the ground. But at this moment, he still had to keep a smile and bear his anger. He said to Su Li, "It's my honor that Miss Su is willing to come here. Please sit for a moment and let me deal with the unexpected situation." Su Li showed a considerate smile and nodded slightly. "First prince, it's very convenient." Then she really sat aside and watched the play. Dongfang Sheng was relieved. He was really afraid that Su Li would be annoyed by Ling Li and leave directly. In that case, his impression in front of his father would be worse than that of the third brother. It should be known that a slight difference could lead to a great difference. Suddenly, Dongfang Sheng felt his body turn cold, as if a terrifying chill had locked onto him, causing him to tremble uncontrollably. But this feeling came and went quickly. He didn't find the source at all. Dongfang Sheng glanced at Ling Li, who was still giggling. He couldn't help but smile bitterly. For a moment, he thought that the source was Ling Li. Today, he was really confused because of anger. Even if the sun rose from the west, it couldn't be this little bastard. Ho ho, Dongfang Sheng sat next to Ling Li's wheelchair. He suppressed his anger and said with a smile, "Brother Ling Li, I remember that the invitation was clearly written to your cousin, Ling Qinglan. Why did you come?" "Yes." Ling Li took it for granted and replied without hesitation, "Brother Sheng, you and third brother Lang should discuss the date and send invitations to my cousin at the same time. Qinglan is too busy to attend to other things." "How can he be busy?" "Qinglan went to the banquet of third brother Lang. I am afraid that you will be unhappy, so I come here." "I am afraid that you will be unhappy." Unhappy. When Su Li heard this, she almost burst into laughter. She probably understood. Ling Qinglan belonged to the third prince's faction on the surface. The third prince sent an invitation to Ling Qinglan to discuss important matters. Dongfang Sheng wanted to make trouble, so he deliberately sent an invitation to Ling Qinglan at the same time. The third prince was also angry. He gave Ling Qinglan a taste of his own medicine and also sent an invitation to her. Originally, Ling Qinglan went to the third prince's place and she came to the first prince's place. It seemed that they tied. But Dongfang Sheng forgot that there was a master in the Ling family who didn't know the rules. Chapter 157. Clang, the sound of the zither resolved the awkwardness of the confrontation between the two people. Ling Li followed the sound and saw Chu Lu looming in the gauze curtain. His eyes brightened. He said, "Oh, isn't this Miss Chu? I only saw Brother Sheng and Miss Su Li just now. I didn't notice that Miss Chu was on the boat. It's my fault." Chu Lu smiled sweetly. Her sweet voice came through the gauze curtain. "Today, I am just a maid playing the zither. Child Ling, don't worry about it. First Prince, the dishes are getting cold. Let's start the banquet first." After being reminded by Chu Lu, Dongfang Sheng suddenly recovered from his anger. He almost forgot that Su Li was still waiting. Dongfang Sheng calmed down and sat down. He said, "Come on, serve the banquet. Since Brother Ling is here, how can I refuse to entertain you?" Immediately, a servant came to the boat and added a banquet table. Ling Li moved the wheelchair to the banquet table. Suddenly, he looked at Su Li who was sitting on the side and said with a smile, "Oh, isn't this Miss Su Li, the first talented girl in Yunjing City? Miss Su is really a natural beauty, just like, yes, a fairy descending to the world. Compared with Wu Xiuxiu and other vulgar girls, you are much more beautiful." These words and Ling Li's surprised expression were really funny. Su Li couldn't help giggling. She had never seen Ling Li act like this. Dongfang Sheng was very angry. In his opinion, Su Li was too young to be deceived. She was actually amused by Ling Li. It was he who invited Su Li to talk business, but it became a place for Ling Li to flirt. It made him feel that he was cheated on, but he had no one to complain. Ling Li. Dongfang Sheng couldn't bear it anymore. He shouted loudly, and the whole ship was immediately quiet. Ling Li sneered in his heart, but he pretended to be confused and said, "Brother Sheng, you can call me if you need something. Why do you shout so loudly? It's not good to disturb Miss Su Li." Dongfang Sheng's heart was burning with anger, but he resisted the urge to curse out loud. He put on a fake smile and said, "Brother Ling, your body is suffering from some damage, so you should eat more and talk less. I happen to have something to ask Miss Su Li." Hi. Ling Li patted the handle of the wheelchair and said, "Brother Sheng, you should have told me earlier. I will stay silent. You can talk, you can talk." Then, Ling Li actually started to eat and drink without caring about anything else. Dongfang Sheng breathed a sigh of relief. There was sweat on his forehead. After he wiped it without a trace, he smiled and praised loudly, "Miss Su, you have been famous since the day you entered Yunjing City. Today I can see you. You are really worthy of your reputation. I have no regrets today when I see you." Su Li smiled and showed her white teeth. She opened her red lips and said, "First Prince, you are so polite. I know I don't deserve such a great reputation. But my master is too famous. I just benefited from him." Sigh. "You can't say that." Dongfang Sheng waved his hand and said, "As the saying goes, a great teacher produces a great disciple. The Lord of the Emperor's preceptor can assist my father to ascend the throne. He must have something extraordinary. I have admired the Lord of the Emperor's preceptor for a long time. I wonder if Miss Su Li can introduce him to me." Well, Su Li looked embarrassed. When Dongfang Sheng saw that there was hope, he tried harder to persuade Su Li. Suddenly, a vulgar voice suddenly came in with the momentum of a sudden clap of thunder. "Di Aisha. I know. Isn't she the most popular girl in the Hongsue building? I remember clearly that I was going to buy her that day. I didn't expect that you got her before me. I was disappointed for a long time." Ling Li held the chicken leg in his right hand and said with a greasy smile. Dongfang Sheng's heart skipped a beat. He looked back and saw that Su Li's face became extremely ugly at a speed visible to the naked eye. No one would feel happy when his master was insulted like this. The sudden disturbance made Dong Fangsheng so angry that he wanted to stab the arrogant and disabled teenager to death. He rushed to Ling Li's table and finally held back his killing intent. He overturned the banquet table with one hand and said angrily, "Ling Li, I respect you. Don't go too far." Ling Li tilted his head and picked his ears. He looked sloppy and disdainfully said, "Brother Sheng, what are you doing? I'm just telling the truth. Why are you angry with me? If my staying here makes you unhappy, you can just ask me to leave. Why do you have to pretend to treat me to wine and meat? How hypocritical. You." Dong Fangsheng stared and his hands trembled with anger. He underestimated Ling Li's shamelessness. Ling Li was more than shameless. He didn't even know what shame was. "It's really unlucky for the Ling family to have a grandson like you," Dong Fangsheng scolded in a roundabout way, but Ling Li nodded calmly and said, "I'm flattered. If there's nothing else, I'm leaving. I don't want you to say that I go too far." Then, Ling Li turned his wheelchair to leave the ship and went to the shore as if nothing had happened. Dong Fangsheng was so angry that he almost spat out blood. He just wanted to strangle this little bastard. Su Li looked cold, but she still maintained the etiquette. She bowed slightly and said, "It's late. First Prince, you'd better go back to the mansion to have a rest. I can't decide the master's affairs. If the master comes to Yunjing one day, I will tell him. I'm leaving now. Please wait." The first prince opened his mouth, but he couldn't say a word in the end. He had completely lost his calm because of Ling Li's disturbance. His mind was in a mess. How could he deal with Su Li's sudden departure calmly? "Ling Li. Ling Qinglan, I'm not done with you." Dong Fangsheng roared angrily, but he didn't notice that Su Li and Ling Li disappeared on the shore almost at the same time. Chu Lu came out from behind the gauze curtain and ordered people to clean up the mess of the ship. Then she walked to the first prince and said softly, "Your Highness, you are impulsive." Dong Fangsheng exhaled heavily and sighed, "Ling Li, the little bastard, went too far. I made a fool of myself in front of Su Li. It's really abominable." Chu Lu was disappointed when she heard that and said, "Your Highness, don't you think that Ling Li's sudden appearance tonight may not be a coincidence, but someone deliberately instructed him?" Dong Fangsheng was slightly shocked and his eyes changed. He looked back at Chu Lu and said, "You mean, Ling Qinglan?" Chu Lu spat out 3 words, which immediately made Dong Fangsheng's face pale. "Ling Li is an idiot. Of course, he doesn't have such a brain. However, if Ling Qinglan instructed him to make trouble and disturb your dinner with Su Li, it makes sense. It is the nature of a playboy to pester endlessly. Even if Ling Qinglan didn't deliberately teach him, Ling Li could also play well. Maybe, Ling Li is not an idiot as people think." The more Chu Lu said, the gloomier Dong Fangsheng was. Ling Li was a playboy even before his legs were disabled. It was impossible for him to hide his nature when he was in his mother's womb. So, it must be Ling Qinglan who instructed him. "Your Highness, please rest assured. Although Su Li refused your kindness, she didn't say anything. She still has a chance. Our He sect will try our best to help you. It's not a big deal for the third prince." Chu Lu comforted him. The first prince was a little relieved. He made a fist and palm salute and said, "Thank you, Lady Chu. You people in Jianghu pay attention to the code of brotherhood. I can't be an exception. If there is anything I can help, just tell me." Chu Lu's beautiful eyes lit up, but her worry soon faded. She said with a smile, "Your Highness, thank you for your kindness. The He sect has no difficulty for the time being. If there is any difficulty, I will help you." "That's good." Haha, they talked happily, but Chu Lu sighed in her heart. She wanted to find a way out from the first prince. But Dong Fangsheng's performance today made her understand that she only had one choice. At least Mr. Li didn't seem to be as reckless and stupid as the first prince. The river was rippling. The night in the Hongyang house was quiet and peaceful. Under the river, Su Li, who went away and came back, leaned under the boat in black tights. She heard every word of the conversation between Chu Lu and the first prince. It turned out that the He sect was behind Dong Fangsheng. Su Li's eyes flashed. Chu Lu still hid something from her. Although they just cooperated, It was normal for Chulu to do so. But it didn't mean that she wouldn't blame her after she knew it. Between the first prince and the third prince, Su Li chose the first prince without any hesitation. It didn't mean that she thought highly of the first prince. It was because the Hongyang house was an ordinary place for others. But she knew it was the stronghold of the Hehuan sect. As for the third prince, he had something to do with Ling Li's force. With Ling Qinglan's mediation, she didn't need to waste time. Thud, 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 there was a sound of footsteps on the boat. It was the sound of Chu Lu and the first prince leaving one after another. Only a few manservants were still cleaning up on the boat. Su Li listened quietly for a moment. When she noticed that the first prince's secret guards retreated, she immediately floated up quietly and was about to leave. All of a sudden, the lake was tumbling. Before Su Li emerged from the water, she saw a familiar and handsome face in the dim lake not far from her. Su Li opened her eyes slightly and showed a surprised expression. Ling Li. He actually went back and hid under the boat to eavesdrop. Maybe both of them were vigilant enough. They were afraid that the guards of the inborn realm around Dongfang Sheng would notice, so they didn't spread out their psychic awareness to investigate. They deliberately controlled the flow of the lake. The position where they eavesdropped was only a few inches away, and no one was near them. Ling Li was also shocked. He looked at Su Li. He didn't expect that Su Li would come back and do the same thing as him. She had no reason to do so. Gurgle. Maybe they were too close to each other. Su Li breathed slightly. A bubble came out of the water and made a light sound. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.